Romanian Eagle. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 426 Sueluo Conflict 1. Not to mention the actions of the Poles, the merger of Ukraine and Romania disrupted the Soviet-Russian southern strategy point inside the famous Kremlin in Moscow. A conference is being held on the merger of Western Ukraine and Romania point. Romania's illegal annexation of parts of Ukraine is trampling on the great socialism. We cannot sit idly by, or the cause of communism will be seriously threatened. Think about it, comrades. As long as we support a small group of traitors against our malicious neighbors, build an unknown and ridiculous country, and then announce a merger. If we are indifferent, no matter how big the country is, it will not be able to withstand division. So for the new imperialists of Romania, we must immediately give a strong counterattack. Let them know that we communists must not accept such extortion. In the conference hall, Chicherin, the People's Commissar of Foreign Affairs, was talking impassively about the threat to Soviet Russia. In Chicherin's words, the People's Commissars present nodded. After all, Ukraine is the territory of the former Tsarist Russia, and as a successor of Tsarist Russia, they cannot accept that one of the territories is occupied by a neighboring country. Besides, if every neighboring country learns from it, it will endanger the foundation of the Soviet regime. After Chicherin finished speaking, Dzerzhinsky, the chairman of the All-Russian Anti-Revolutionary Committee, expressed his views. Comrade Chicherin is right. It is true that there can be no concessions in this matter. We will give the most favorable response to the provocations of the new imperialists. Dzerzhinsky first agreed with Chicherin's words, and then he said, but we must distinguish between primary and secondary. At present, our primary enemy is the white bandits of Kolchak, Denikin and others. These people are a serious threat to the safety of the Soviet government. If part of the force is transferred to fight back against the Romanians, will this give the white bandit army a chance to breathe? After all, the people under the white bandit army are eagerly looking forward to it. Our liberation. Dzerzhinsky's words also aroused concern, and he was right. If the power is dispersed, will it give the white bandit army, the biggest threat at present, a chance to breathe? This is really a dilemma. Seeing Dzerzhinsky's opposition to his proposal, Chicherin asked rhetorically, Comrade Dzerzhinsky, you can guarantee that, if we don't fight back against Romania's actions, other neighboring countries will not take the opportunity and do the same. Are you going to invade our country? Facing Chicherin's question, Dzerzhinsky answered truthfully, sorry, I can't guarantee this. Dzerzhinsky's answer allowed Chicherin to find a gap. Since there is no guarantee, then we must let Romania taste the wrath of the Soviets. But after the force is drawn, how can we guarantee that we will not give the white bandit army a chance to breathe? Perhaps Romania's move is precisely to attract our attention. Let us divide our troops to achieve the purpose of intervention. Facing Dzerzhinsky's rhetorical question, Chicherin replied confidently, this is easy to handle. Just like Kolchak, Denikin, Udenich and Miller besieged the Soviet government before calling on the people to join army. As long as another 500,000 Soviet troops are recruited, we can not only maintain the pursuit of the white bandit army, but also teach the new imperialists who dare to reach out. Hearing what Chicherin said, Dzerzhinsky couldn't help but ask, but now, we have recruited 2 million troops. If we continue to recruit, how can we supply weapons? Chicherin answered confidently, at present, we have occupied a large area in Ufa, Kursk, Tsaritsyn and other places, and we can recruit soldiers and collect supplies from them. Moreover, weapons and ammunition can also allow workers to work overtime to produce. In addition, we have seized a lot of weapons, which can be equipped to the troops. Chicherin's approach immediately aroused the interest of other people's commissars. Yes, the size of the Soviet Union has now expanded, and it is entirely possible to recruit soldiers from it. The weapons can also be captured first. Although the caliber is different, the ammunition stored is less, and it cannot be produced yet, but it is enough to kill the enemy. The dispute between the two is whether to regard foreign intervening forces as the main enemy of Soviet Russia. because in the strategic policy, formulated by Lenin before, between the White Guards and the intervening army, the White Guards were first annihilated, and then the Allied forces were defeated. Gradually the other people's commissars began to lean towards Chicherin's proposal. The dispute between the two people, said from a shallower side, now that the threat of the White Guards to the Soviets has become less, no longer a life or death juncture, does the Soviet Union need to start attacking the intervention army? On a deeper level, does Lenin's policy need to be changed? Faced with this nonsense, Lenin, who was presiding over the meeting at this time, did not intend to speak, but instead asked Tolovsky next to him, "What do you think of Comrade Chicherin's suggestion?" Comrade Tolovsky, as the founder of the Red Army, the main reason for future purges, Trotsky certainly had the most say in military matters. So when Lenin asked himself, he took a sip of water and said slowly, "Comrade Chicherin's suggestion is feasible." Then he gave the reason. At present, there are nearly 80 million people within our range, and we occupy most of the arsenal. In terms of population and weapons and ammunition, the White Bandit Army is far inferior. At this time, it is appropriate to be unfriendly to the surrounding area. It is also possible for countries to show their strength. And we need to note that, unlike the intervention forces of Britain and France, Romania's practice of creating disputed areas is very threatening to us. After all, this pure intervention is different, which will drive its domestics, and people who don't know the truth are hostile to the Soviets. This will also become an important problem for us to liberate the world in the future. Seeing that Trotsky agreed with Chicherin's proposal, Lenin did not object. He now seems to be an irrelevant person. Instead, he asked the other people's commissars, "Do you have any different opinions?" No point. In the face of Lenin's questioning, some smart people felt that the atmosphere was a little unusual, and they didn't want to be caught between the two. So basically they all shook their heads, indicating that they had no other opinion. Seeing that no one had any other opinion, Lenin continued, "Since there is no other opinion, let us raise our hands to vote whose opinion will be adopted this time. Raise your hand if you agree with Comrade Chicherin. Brush. Several hands raised. Lenin glanced briefly, and in addition to Trotsky's men, there were two other commissioners. 6 votes. He simply reported the numbers, and then added, "I agree with Comrade Dzerzhinsky's suggestion. Please raise your hand." After brushing, a few hands were raised again. Lenin saw that no one else raised their hand but himself. 4 votes. After simply counting the numbers, Lenin said to the clerk behind him, "For the record, after the central vote, I support Comrade Chicherin's response to Romania's provocation." The clerk quickly wrote down today's voting results in the record book, which need to be archived for later review. Afterwards, a telegram from Moscow was sent to Yegorov, commander of the Southern Front, and Stalin, the military commissar, and it was up to them to see how they would deal with the new imperialist Romania. Chapter 427 Luosu conflict. 2. The telegram from Moscow made Yegorov, the commander of the Southern Front, and Stalin, the political commissar, a little unwilling. Yes, the Southern White Bandit Army headed by Denikin has been suppressed by them to the Crimea Peninsula and the Caucasus. With just a little more force, they can be split into 2 parts, because the 1st Cavalry Army had already reported to them that it was less than 100 kilometers away from Rostov. It only took 1 day to take this strategic point. It's just this Moscow telegram that makes all this unreal, because the Southern Front is about to be transferred to the western region of Ukraine, and at the same time they will be renamed the Western Front, and the vacancy they left will be taken over by the Southeast Front. So even if they were close to Rostov, they could only let the 1st Cavalry Army withdraw. Because the Southeast Front Army will turn to strategic defense next. Even if Rostov is defeated, it will not be able to hold it. It's really frustrating. Yegorov, the commander of the Southern Front, slapped the table with a slap in the face. Yegorov, who graduated from the Kazan Infantry Officer School, was very unwilling. He knows too well how important Rostov is as a military general. This strategically important city, located only 45 kilometers from the mouth of the Don River, as long as it takes the city of Azov at its mouth to the sea, it becomes their possession and can be easily captured. As long as the 2 cities are captured, Denikin's White Bandit Army will inevitably divide the city into 2 parts. But no chance now. Okay, Yegorov, Take a moment to think about it, and then face the enemy of Romania. Seeing Yegorov vent his inner dissatisfaction, Stalin, as a political commissar, must stop his behavior. After all, this is the decision of the central government, and they, as members of the Soviet, must abide by it unconditionally. But deep down, Stalin was actually dissatisfied with the Central Committee's decision. In his view, the first task at present should be to eliminate the White Bandit Army. After the internal enemies are eliminated, you can concentrate on making these neighbors who take advantage of the Soviets feel the wrath of the communists. It is really unwise to disperse the power of lying now. It is simply time to reply to the White Bandit Army. Whoever made such a decision is simply committing a crime against the Soviets and should be sent to Siberia for labor reform. And he also knew the inside story of this central order. But it was because there were so many victories that some members of the Central Committee couldn't understand the situation. But now only the command can be executed first. Although Stalin was also dissatisfied in his heart, as he was also famous in later generations, the city government was quite deep. It would not be like Yegorov, showing dissatisfaction. After being said by Stalin, Yegorov also calmed down. Since it cannot be changed, he can only do the work at hand according to the order of the central government. So he immediately considered how to arrange his troops and turned to the west of Ukraine. Yegorov looked at the map and said to Stalin, "Now we can let the 1st Cavalry Army withdraw and then wait for the southeast front to take over." Totally doable. The suggestion made by Yegorov was also approved by Stalin. Yegorov continued, "Then the 14th Army can go to Kiev first and strengthen the defense of the area. This is to prevent Romania from thinking about the city that it should not have. No problem, just do as you say." After obtaining Stalin's consent, Yegorov called in the messengers to give orders. The reason why this scene exists is mainly because it is related to the unique military system of early Soviet Russia, which is the political commissar decision-making system. The reason for this situation is also closely related to the lack of Soviet and Russian military cadres at the very beginning of the war. Soviet Russia found that the soldiers' committee established by itself could not replace the role of the commander at all, and then implemented a political commissar system, that is, a political commissar. However, in the battle, it was found that the political commissar has the political ability, but most of the military ability is worrying. And Soviet Russia has no time to train military cadres, so they can only use the former Russian officers who were arrested by them. However, in order to prevent these officers, who may be dissatisfied with the Soviets, from causing chaos, the combat orders must have the signatures of the military chief and the political commissar. And in order to prevent the two from arguing, no one is convinced by the other, causing unnecessary losses. So the final decision will be carried out by the political commissar, and Yegorov, who had been a colonel in the Tsarist Russian army, certainly could not be on an equal footing with Stalin at the top of the Soviet Union. So usually he gave his opinion, and then Stalin made the final decision. But fortunately, the two have not been together for a long time, but they are extremely harmonious. After Yegorov had given his advice, Stalin told him good news, because we have to face the Romanians, our front will be strengthened. At present, the Soviet Military Council has decided to incorporate the 6th, 8th, 9th, and 2nd Cavalry Army into our front. In addition, because Romania the equipment is well equipped, so the military commission will also support us with a lot of technical equipment such as machine guns, artillery, and armored vehicles. This news is really good, so that we can at least have military advantage, which can be fought if the gap between the technical arms is not large. Knowing that the troops and weapons and equipment will be replenished. Yegorov jumped up happily like a child getting a beloved toy, completely seeing his previous dissatisfaction. After all, not everyone is commanding an army of 500,000 people. I don't know when this opportunity will come next. Looking at Yegorov, who was as happy as a child, Stalin walked outside. Seeing that Stalin was going out, Yegorov asked curiously, "Where are you going?" "I need to prepare food and other materials, which cannot be transported by the rear. We need to raise some to ease the pressure on the central government." Comrade Stalin had a high level of consciousness and considered it from the perspective of the center. However, the materials near us have already been collected, and it is very difficult to collect them again. Stalin's words made Yegorov think that he was recruiting nearby. "I know that. I didn't plan to collect supplies nearby this time point. Not collecting supplies nearby, Yegorov asked with some doubts. Where are you going to collect? I want Kiev to collect supplies for us. Kiev. Stalin's words surprised Yegorov. Not only is Ukraine a neighboring country in name, is it really good to collect supplies like this? Seeing Yegorov's surprised look, Stalin knew what he was worried about. Don't worry, I won't let our troops collect it. Ukraine is our granary. Let the people in Kiev help us. Don't worry, we will inform the center. Equals. Chapter 428 Luosu Conflict 3. The Soviet Union's large-scale deployment of troops was completely hidden from Romania's sight point. In fact, since Edel's plan to annex western Ukraine, intelligence work on Soviet Russia has become the top priority of Romania's intelligence services, and its priority has been higher than that of Britain, France, and the United States. Therefore, when the Southern Front began to behave abnormally, the news that Soviet Russia might be planning to start a war was sent back to the country. After all, the Romanian intelligence services have been deeply cultivating in Russia for many years. Even if Soviet Russia came to power, its hidden intelligence personnel could not be eliminated. Faced with the news that the Soviet Union and Russia might start a war from the intelligence department, Edel replied after reading it, I know. Edel was already prepared for Soviet Russia's intention to provoke a war. After all, the deep-rooted greed of the Russians cannot be changed by changing the regime. And this is the time of the Soviet Russian army. Romania is not afraid at all. Now the Soviet Russian army is not the steel torrent that made the whole of Europe tremble with fear. Now the Soviet Russian division level troops generally have 10,000 to 15,000 people, and the machine gun configuration is only between 130 to 160. In the configuration of its main cannons to suppress firepower, there are only 40 to 50 cannons, basically 76.2mm and 57mm caliber mountain artillery. It is rude to say that the weapons and equipment of the Soviet Russian army have declined in technical equipment such as artillery and machine guns compared with that Tsarist Russia period. However, the morale of the army was much higher than that of that Tsarist period. And when morale is high, when the gap between weapons and equipment is not too big, it often has the upper hand. This is also the White Guards, mainly composed of the Russian army, which is why they have repeatedly failed to defeat the Red Army of the Soviet Union. However, the Soviet Russian Red Army can only fight the White Guards, which is completely incomparable compared with the Romanian army. Of course, this also has a lot to do with the main enemy of the Soviet Russian Red Army is the White Guards and the inaction of the Allied Intervention Army. After all, I have seen the strength of the British and French troops not working hard, so I'm afraid that they are far inferior to the Romanians in Britain and France. While Soviet Russia was preparing to provoke this war, the Romanians were not idle either. Since the annexation of western Ukraine, the Romanian military has concentrated its forces in Ukraine. Various troops have moved into Ukraine from their previous positions. In addition, Major General Solder and Captain Karist, who were purchasing arms in Germany, are also purchasing a large amount of arms. Weapons and ammunition from warehouse to warehouse were loaded onto trains by German stevedores and transported to Romania. Britain, France and other countries have given the green light to Romania's purchases in Germany. As long as Romania takes a fancy to the weapons, they will immediately request the German side to ship them. So much so that the loading and unloading workers couldn't carry it for a while, and a large number of arms were piled up at the railway station. After learning about this situation, Britain and France even hired other Germans to carry it out of their own pockets. In addition, the British and French sides also expressed their position to Major General Solder and Karist in Germany. If there are not enough trains to be transported, they are even willing to urgently transfer wagons to help them transport them. It seems to them that they are transporting these arms to Romania. It seems that they are more Romanian than Solder and Karist. Therefore, with the unremitting efforts of Britain and France, in 1 month, more than 700 F-18 and K-16 artillery pieces, 200,000 G98 rifles, 3,000 G08 heavy machine guns, 200,000 tons of ammunition, and 20,000 tons of other substances were shipped to Romania. As a result, the trains transporting arms have seriously affected the normal train operation of the countries along the way, greatly weakening the travel of its people and the transportation of materials. However, in the face of Britain, France, and Romania, these countries also dare not speak out. After these weapons and equipment were transported to Romania, they were quickly transported to the Western Ukrainian front. So much so that the general staff racked their brains in order to find enough technical soldiers to use them. In addition to the deployment of artillery personnel from various units, non-artillery soldiers and officers who have used artillery are immediately transferred to the artillery unit to form a new establishment. Therefore, in just 1 month, in addition to the sharp expansion of the division-level artillery establishment, from 72 artillery pieces to 108, adding a F-18 105 howitzer battalion, Romania also added 3 independent artillery brigades, 1 brigade equipped with 108 artillery pieces, F-18 Type 105 howitzer, and 3 heavy artillery regiments, 1 regiment equipped with 54 K16 long-range cannons. The machine guns have also increased from 156 to 238 per division, mainly by assigning the newly added heavy machine guns to the company, and each company adding 2 heavy machine guns. In addition, there are also materials such as engineer shovels, field telephones, raincoats, tents, etc., which are also added. While Romania was busy preparing, the Western Front Army, whose name has been changed, who played on behalf of Soviet Russia this time, finally completed the handover with the Southeast Front Army. Take care, comrades Balakun and Gusev. I wish you an early eradication of Denikin's white bandit army. At the time of parting, Yegorov, commander of the Western Front, and Stalin, the political commissar, were saying goodbye to Gusev, the commander of the Southeastern Front, and Barakan, the political commissar. Take care of you too, comrade Stalin and Yegorov. I wish you an early defeat of the Romanians. Our Southeastern Front will cheer for it. Stalin and Yegorov waved goodbye to Balakan and Gusev, and got into the car. Under the escort of soldiers, we drove to Kyiv. Balakan greeted Gusev and said, "Okay, then we will face Denikin alone. We are not afraid of him either. If we can drive him from near Moscow to the Crimea, we can drive him into the sea. You're still so optimistic. It's the confidence of a Bolshevik. Stalin and Yegorov, who left by car, were also talking, but they were talking about the information of the Western Front. Stalin, who was sitting in the car, said to Yegorov next to him, "The 14th Army has arrived in Kyiv. We are more at ease now. At least we don't have to worry about Kyiv being raided by the Romanians." Stalin added new news. The 2nd Cavalry Army has set off from Kursk and is expected to arrive in 10 days. In addition, the 9th Army sent a telegram saying that it encountered an encounter when passing through Mozoly in the Belarusian region. In the blizzard weather, the slow movement of the troops may not catch up with the scheduled time. After hearing that the 9th Army couldn't keep up with the time, Yegorov scolded, "This damn weather, comrade Stalin. Let me know if you have any other news." Facing Yegorov's question, Stalin shook his head and said, "That's all we have at the moment, but it's the news of our opponent Romanians. Tell me the story." It seems that Yegorov is also very concerned about the situation of his opponents. According to our knowledge, Romania has purchased a large number of arms from Germany. There are hundreds of artillery pieces, all of which are above 100mm caliber. According to the analysis, they are the latest German F-18 105 howitzers and K16 Krupp 150 cannons, plus a lot of stuff like machine guns and ammunition. It's not going to be a good fight. These bloody imperialists will be wiped out by the proletariat sooner or later. Hearing Stalin's information, Yegorov felt a headache. These weapons and equipment will greatly threaten the safety of the soldiers of the Red Army, but there is nothing they can do. Maybe there is a way. Yegorov, who came up with the idea, said, "We can't let the Romanians send these arms safely to the front line, which is irresponsible to the soldiers. Can we, like other countries, encourage their workers to strike to support us?" After listening to the suggestion given by Yegorov, Stalin shook his head and said, "The Central Committee has considered this before, but according to the information sent by our Romanian comrades, the domestic stubborn forces are very strong. and even we cannot directly use the banner of the Communist Party for propaganda. And because there are too many reactionary remarks in domestic public opinion, the deceived ordinary people are very hostile to us. Stalin's words shattered Yegorov's idea of destructing through internal destruction. It seems that only the battlefield witnesses strength equals. Chapter 429 Luosu conflict. 4. The time is slowly coming to December, and the Ukrainian region has already entered the winter of thousands of miles of snow. In this season of dripping water, the Russian and Soviet armies in western Ukraine are separated by dozens of kilometers in the port city of Nikolaev. Close to the front line, a group of Romanian soldiers are pushing a Lev-18 105 howitzer into the position. Everyone work hard. Hey. This is the new 105th Howitzer Battalion of the 15th Division of the Romanian Army, entering the position. Now the Romanian Infantry Division has 4 artillery battalions, 2 75th Mountain Field Artillery battalions, and 2 105th Howitzer battalions. The cold wind in the winter did not make the soldiers feel cold, but the work of pushing artillery and carrying ammunition in large quantities made everyone look steamy. Major Tovsk, the battalion commander, was standing on a high place observing the placement of the positions. The boys worked hard, and the placement of the artillery was also done well, and he was very satisfied. Major Tovsk previously served as deputy battalion commander of another 105th Howitzer Battalion of the 15th Division. There is nothing more comforting than being able to stand out from the 4 deputy battalion commanders when encountering a large expansion of artillery. This time when Major Tovsk was full of vigor and imagined the future. Major General Kledov, the commander of the 15th Division, was deploying his own troops in the headquarters of the 15th Division in Nikolaev. Major General Kledov was giving orders to the messengers. Order the 1504th Regiment to deploy on Kostov Point. After sending off the messengers, Colonel Dork, the Chief of Staff, stepped forward and asked, "We have already deployed the 1501st and 1503rd Regiment outside the city. If the 1504th Regiment is also transferred out, only the 1503rd Regiment will be left in the city. If there is an emergency, will the troops be a little less?" the Chief of Staff Colonel Dork asked, and Major General Kledov pointed to the military map and replied, "A lot. As for the Ukrainian and Russian civilians in the city, do they dare to turn up the flowers? And you see, the Nepalese we are guarding. Gilead is a must for the enemy to take Odessa. If it weren't for the fact that the city was full of Ukrainians and Russians, I would have sent another battalion to strengthen the defense point for the heart of the Chief of Staff." Major General Kledov continued, "And there is the 9th Division behind us. As long as we hold on for 2 days, we will be able to reinforce us. So what you are worried about is unlikely to happen. Besides, we are not on the enemy's main offensive side. Didn't the intelligence department have already probed it? The enemy opposite us has only 1 army. The real battle is in Vinnytsia." After Major General Kledov finished speaking, looking at Vinnytsia, it seems that he must be yearning for the war over there. As a soldier who doesn't want to expand the territory and make achievements. But unfortunately, in the battle with Germany and Austria, the 15th Division did not get a good performance. And when they fought against the Hungarian revolutionaries, they did not get dazzling results. Now that he is at war with the Soviet and Russian troops, and he is far away from the battle site, it makes me angry to think about it. Vinnytsia, which Major General Kledov yearns for physically and mentally, is currently looking like a mountain or rain point in the city of Vinnytsia, in the newly established Ukrainian army headquarters. All the bright generals were listening with a serious look to Admiral Ferit explaining the combat mission this time. That's right, Admiral Ferit, who has made great achievements in battle, is the commander this time. Pity the 2 generals, Prezhan and Kortois, who were pushed back by the war, because the promotion of marshal requires grand preparations, according to the battle plan. In Vinnytsia, our army is divided into 3 divisions. Among them, the left division is dominated by the 12th, 19th, 23rd, and 25th divisions, and 4 divisions are formed as a left-wing cluster. Lieutenant General Ankara will be the commander, and a 150 heavy artillery regiment will be assigned to prevent the enemy from interspersed and protect the flank of our army. On the right, there are 7 divisions, 14 divisions, 16 divisions, 21 divisions. 8 divisions are mainly for my right wing group, and the commander is Lieutenant General Mandif. The main combat goal is to prevent the enemy from attacking and prepare to strike. The middle road is dominated by the 1st Division of the Imperial Guard, the 3rd Division, the 5th Division. 11 divisions form the middle road group, and I personally serve as the commander. The main combat target blocks the enemy's offensive and waits for an opportunity to encircle the enemy with the right group in order to achieve the annihilation of the enemy's living strength. The 1st Cavalry Division and the Armored Brigade act as mobile forces, ready to attack the interspersed enemy at any time. Finally, the 1st and 28th Divisions of the Imperial Guard stayed behind in Vinica to prepare fortifications and to be ready to reinforce the front point after Friat arranged the battle plan. He looked at the participants in the conference hall. In fact, his battle plan is very simple and easy to understand. As long as you understand a little military, you can understand it. This is a sloping deployment formation, mainly relying on the middle road to block the enemy's attack, and then detouring to the rear of the enemy with a roundabout attack on the right to annihilate it. Of course, despite the simplicity of this plan, it was actually specially arranged by Ferit, based on the topography of Vinica. The key point is the need to block the enemy's attack in the middle. For this reason, he reviewed the intelligence of previous operations after the establishment of Soviet Russia and the organizational structure of its army, and carefully designed it. From Ferit's point of view, although the Soviet Russian army is said to have high morale, it is not afraid of death in battle. But in the organization and management of its army, it was a complete mess. Take the group charge that Soviet Russia likes to use most. The main reason is that the military skills of the officers are not enough, so this simple method must be used. The battle between them and the White Guards, in Ferit's view, was more like a bad battle. Both sides fought with great openness and loopholes, but because of the higher organizational ability of Soviet Russia, it was possible for Soviet Russia to laugh to the end. Take the famous Czech Army Corps in the Russian Civil War as an example. This is just a group of former Austro-Hungarian prisoners of war captured by Tsarist Russia. As a result, this group of about 100,000 prisoners of war actually turned upside down in Russia, and it is conceivable how big the gap between the strengths of the two sides is. When Ferit held a military conference to deploy the battle plan, Soviet Russia also held a military mobilization conference in Berkichev. That's right, the Soviet Union's war meeting has long been held. And now it is a mobilization meeting to prepare for war. Since it is a mobilization meeting, Comrade Stalin, who is in charge of the army's thinking, can of course only stand on the podium and mobilize the commanders at all levels below. Comrades, the motherland is watching us. The leader, Comrade Lenin, is also waiting for our good news in Moscow. This battle against the neo-imperialist Romania will open a new chapter in the revolution. Let us use full enthusiasm and with an indelible fighting spirit come and fight this battle with Romania. As Stalin's voice fell, the commanders and fighters present shouted together, "Ruler, the preparations for the war on both sides are almost the same, and the next battle in Vinica is about to start. Who will kill the deer depends on the performance of both sides." Equals. Chapter 430 Luosu Conflict 5. In winter, the Ukrainian land is piercingly cold, and the cloudy sky seems to be that God does not want to see human beings fighting. But even if God is unwilling, it can't stop the outbreak of war. Tatate sound of screeching shells and the roar of machine guns played the opening music of the death feast. On the earth, the two sides represent soldiers from different countries and send invitations to the god of death to each other. In Kordalovka, the soldiers of the Romanian Central Group, which was in charge of defending the position, were resisting the attack of the Western Front. The main attack was the officers and soldiers of the 14th Army, who, under the command of the army commander Sherevich, launched a fierce attack on the enemy. The officers and soldiers of the Romanian 5th Division and the 16th Division were in charge of the defense. Under the command of Major General Fergus, they used their advantages to stubbornly resist the onslaught of the Soviet Russian army. Uloith the sound of the ula, the Soviet Russian soldiers charged towards the Romanian positions. Shooting. Following the order of Captain Buckbow, Holt injured the smell of gunpowder and issued his own resistance to the rushing enemy. Snapita shot rang out, and a Soviet soldier targeted by Holt fell in a pool of blood. After winning the first battle, he quickly pulled the gun back to look for the next target. A young face in a military uniform and wielding a pistol was put into the aiming circle by him. This is a young man with glasses. If not in the battlefield, Holt thinks he will be in the classroom. But that's not why Holt is targeting him. When he participated in his first battle, the veteran told him to shoot at medium distances and to give priority to high value targets in order of value: officers, non-commissioned officers, gunners, veterans, and then other targets. Because these people are the most threatening and most likely to guarantee their own survival. Because these are the lessons of blood. And this young man has an even bigger reason why Holt can't let him go. That is, he wears an armband. The regiment had sent someone to explain that many of the people with armbands in the Soviet Russian army were their political commissars. This is the first time Holt has heard the word commissar. The people sent in the regiment explained that this is equivalent to the duties of a combination of priests and supervisors, which is a unique military rank in Soviet Russia. As long as he is killed, the morale of the Soviet Russian army will drop, and the soldiers will not be so desperate. So Holt incorporated it into his own circle of standards. The first time he saw him, Snapped, a shot rang out, and a soldier fell beside the young commissar with glasses. It wasn't Holt's shot. Obviously someone else found this high value target, but the marksmanship was a little worse. The gunshot clearly alarmed the political commissar, and he quickly found a bullet crater and hid in it. Pity. Holt secretly said something in his heart and quickly aimed at one of the most aggressive soldiers. Snapped. The Soviet Russian soldier, who straightened his waist and showed fearlessness, fell. Holt pulled the trigger back quickly and started aiming again. However, he had to glance at the crater intentionally or unintentionally, and it seemed that he was unwilling to miss a high-value target. However, he was very patient and believed that the political committee would appear. Snapped. Another Soviet soldier fell. The precise shooting techniques of Romanian soldiers caused great casualties to the charging Soviet and Russian soldiers. Gradually heavy casualties slowed the charge of the soldiers, and this time Holt took aim at the crater again. Since he is the priest and supervisor of the army, the morale of the soldiers is low, and he must stand up to boost morale. Holt ignored the other charging Soviet soldiers, and he was not fighting alone. You can trust the ability of your comrades in arms to block the enemy's charge. And I need to compete with this political commissar to see who can't hold back. He has been hunting since he was a child, and the most important thing is patience. With the passage of time, the closer to the position, the greater the casualties of the Soviet Russian soldiers. This is the hesitation of these Soviet Russian soldiers can be seen from the naked eye. They are human too, and they don't want to sacrifice like that. The performance of the Soviet Russian soldiers made the political commissar who was hiding in the crater unable to hide, and he suddenly rushed out, shouted, "Comrades, we!" Snapped. The shot rang out, and the commissar's impassioned speech came to an abrupt end. He stared blankly at the bleeding wound on his chest, then fell to the ground. And these Soviet Russian soldiers who witnessed the sacrifice of the political commissar no longer had the courage to continue to charge. A soldier fled to his position, completely ignoring his back to the enemy. The power of role models is infinite, and if there is one, there will be another. Under the leadership of the escape, the Soviet Russian soldiers fled to their positions one after another, and of course Romanian soldiers would not let such a good target go. After a burst of gunfire, many corpses were left in front of the position point, and Holt did not shoot at these courageous enemies like his comrades. As the best hunter in his hometown, he disdains to attack prey who only know how to escape. This is also the reason why he was the most capable hunter in his hometown, but ended up staying in the army. He took out a carving knife and carved 3 vertical marks on the butt of the gun. After thinking about it, he carved another horizontal mark on it. There are dense vertical marks engraved on the butt of the gun, and there are more than 30 marks if you count them carefully. And the horizontal marks, plus the one he carved just now, there are as many as 6. After Holt had just finished his work, the company commander Buckbow came over Holt, killed a few enemies in the battle just now. Holt stretched out 3 fingers and said, 3. Hearing what Holt said, Captain Buckbow was a little surprised and said, "Why so few? You are the best shooter in my company, and Docker has killed 5. The Docker that Buckbow said was the second best shooter in their company after Holt. He once said that he would surpass Holt in killing enemies. But Holt never responded to this. He just wanted to find the thrill of fighting wits and bravery with cunning. Pray point there's a high value enemy that's very cunning, and I've been grinding with him for a long time. Point he still gave some respect to the company commander, so he said the reason casually. Point Buckbow said immediately, I know. Is it the political commissar who boosted the morale of the enemy? Point how do you know? I heard a soldier complain at the time that he didn't hit this guy. Didn't expect you to kill him in the end. Ha 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 ha. Hiccup. Point Buckbows didn't get Holt to react. He picked up a rag, dipped it in gun oil, and started wiping the gun. A partner that has been used all the time requires careful maintenance. Buckbow, who was making fun of himself, had to leave first. The wrong voice of his rebuking the other soldiers rang out on the ground. Point before the sun went down, the Soviet army launched 2 more attacks. However, they were all beaten back by the soldiers, and the fallen Soviet and Russian soldiers in front of the position were almost in pieces. In these 2 battles, Holt did not find a cunning prey. Equals Chapter 431 Luosu Conflict 6. The first day of Soviet Russia's tentative attack finally stopped when the sun was about to set. Point when the casualty figures on the first day were reported to the Western Front headquarters, Stalin, who received the telegram, couldn't believe his eyes. Have you checked with the 14th Army, His Excellency the future kind father, with a grim expression, asked the officer who sent the telegram. The officer, shrouded in the majesty of his loving father, said in a trembling voice, Comrade Political Commissar, I have checked with the 14th Army, and the numbers are correct. Point then go out. Point as Stalin's voice fell, the officer hurriedly fled. He had never seen Comrade Political Commissar look at him with such a serious expression. It felt like he was looking at a criminal. Point after the officer fled, Stalin looked at the casualty figures in the battle report in front of him, and his heart burst into anger. He planned to ask Commander Yegorov to discuss countermeasures. It seemed that the previous tactics against the White Bandit army would not work. Point he pushed open the door of the war room and saw that Yegorov was studying a combat map. Point Yegorov, who was disturbed by the sound of the door being pushed, asked in surprise, Comrade Stalin, what's wrong with you? Your face is so bad. Yegorov's inquiry made Stalin's face soften a lot. After all, he was more in line with his temper. So the political commissar took out the battle report in his hand and said, it's all the result of this battle report. Point let me see. Point curious about what was written in the battle report. To make his political commissar so angry, Yegorov took the telegram from Stalin. Point at first glance, Yegorov looked worse than Stalin. Will this Smilga still fight? Let him test the attack. How could there be so many casualties? The Smilga that Yegorov referred to was the commander of the 14th Army. Considering that his combat style is relatively stable, to let his 14th Army take the lead and test the strength of the Romanians first. Unexpectedly, he lost more than 10,000 in one day, which is a rare phenomenon in the history of Soviet-Russian warfare. Point that's right. In this battle report, the 14th Army killed 6,487 people, wounded 6,781 people, and lost 637 people. In one day, there were almost as many wounded and killed. Point let's think about how we will fight next. If it continues to be this kind of casualties, how will we explain to the central government? Point seeing that Yegorov was more angry than himself. Instead, Stalin persuaded him. Point maybe it was how he explained this half sentence to the central government that woke him up, and Yegorov suppressed his anger. Stalin was right. If such casualties continue, they will not be able to withstand long consumption with an army of 500,000. Point what do you think about this matter? As soon as Yegorov asked this question, he knew it was not good. He was the military chief, but instead asked the political commissar about military matters. But Stalin didn't pay attention to this. He replied, we don't know the specific situation at the moment. I think that Comrade Smilga will send a detailed battle report first, and we will study it first. Of course, it is best to be able to observe carefully on the front line. It is good. Point I think it works. Both of them agreed to let Smilga send a detailed battle report first to understand the situation. Therefore, Stalin called a communications officer and asked him to send a report to the 14th Army and asked Smilga to send a detailed battle report. At the same time, he demanded that he stop the offensive until the front command agreed. Point before Yegorov and Stalin waited long, the communications officer walked in with a telegram. Point commander, Political Commissar, this is a callback from the 14th Army. Okay, you go down. After receiving the telegram and sending the communications officer away, the two began to study the contents of the telegram carefully. After an hour of two-person research, judging from this telegram, every decision Smelga made, although not the best response, was not wrong. Could it be that the enemy is too strong? Or thought popped into the minds of the two of them. I think you have to scare the front line to see it for yourself. In the end, it was Stalin who came up with the solution. A little problem could not suffocate the steel, comrade. I think so too. Igorov also agreed with Stalin's words. So the next question is, who is going to see it first? I think I, as the commander, should take a look at the problems encountered by the 14th Army. Yegorov, the military chief, felt that he should go down and see for himself. After thinking about it, Stalin replied, "Alright, I'm in charge of other things at home." The reason why Stalin gave up going to the front was that the front army had a lot of things every day. If the two of them left together, there would be no one able to take charge of such a large front army headquarters. When are we leaving? I can't wait any longer. I'm leaving early tomorrow morning. Compared with the somewhat frowning faces in the west, the atmosphere in the middle group headquarters is much more harmonious. Admiral Ferit looked at the casualty report in his hand, smiled and said to Lieutenant General Landru next to him, as expected, Yegorov, who is expected to be hit by the stick, has a toothache. Lieutenant General Landru, who was also the chief of staff as his deputy, immediately said, if they hurt the western front of Soviet Russia, what should they do if they retreat? You must know that we have assembled almost all of our troops here, and Tran, who is currently being recovered from Hungary. In Sylvania and other places, there is only one 29th Division stationed. I'm a little worried that there will be troubles with the locals. What Lieutenant General Andrew was worried about, General Fried was not afraid at all. If they dare, we can fight Hungary without any effort. If we dare to make trouble, let them know the majesty of the kingdom. And I'm sure that the Soviet and Russian troops will not retreat, otherwise their so-called Soviet government will lose face. Isn't it about liberating all mankind? I'm afraid of such a small casualty. How can I have the courage to say such a big thing? Fried's words dispelled Andrew's worries. Instead, he said with interest, since the Soviet Union will not retreat, do you think it is possible for them to increase their troops? Ferry judged, it's unlikely at the moment. According to information, there are currently only 2.3 million people in Soviet Russia, and they are still increasing their troops when they are surrounded by enemies. Don't they want to end the internal station? Since we can't retreat, is there any reinforcement? If the commander on the other side is not a fool, then he can only use his troops to make extraordinary moves. Hearing Andrew's words, Felit said with a smile, I'll just wait for their soldiers to make a surprise move. Otherwise, there will be a chance to hurt the Soviet Union. These Russians are better than you, and they don't have a long memory. I forgot, you are a master at this now. The two Romanian commanders are waiting for Yegorov's means. But before that, he needs to go to the front to see Romania's strength for himself. Equals, if you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 432 Luosu Conflict 7. Let's go. A Soviet-Russian commander waved for the soldiers to attack. A group of soldiers shouted and followed the commander as they charged towards the enemy's position. On either side of them there were the same Soviet soldiers charging together. The attack of the Soviet-Russian soldiers soon led to a counter-attack by the Romanian soldiers. Romania's violent artillery fire left many Soviet and Russian soldiers in a pool of blood. In the face of such a situation, Yegorov, who was watching the battle from the rear, had nothing to do. Although Soviet Russia also has artillery, most of them are small artillery with a caliber of less than 100 millimeters. Although you can fight with the White Bandit army, you can't find the North after fighting with the well-trained Romanian artillery. Moreover, in terms of quantity, Soviet Russian artillery is at an absolute disadvantage, so it is justified to be suppressed by Romania. However, the Soviet army was not helpless. They took advantage of the fast-moving characteristics of small artillery and fired a shot for a different place. Do your best to ensure fire support is available. However, this kind of support is better than nothing. It can only give the soldiers spiritual support and let them know that the Soviet and Russian artillery is still supporting them. The Soviet-Russian soldiers continued to charge towards the enemy positions under the bombardment of artillery. When approaching a distance of 500 or 600 meters, the machine guns on the Romanian positions sounded, and the lives of the Soviet-Russian soldiers were harvested by them. Seeing such an almost massacre scene, Yegorov took off his military cap and threw it on the ground. However, in order to reduce the casualties of the soldiers in the next battle, this charge will continue. When the Soviet-Russian soldiers rushed to a distance of 300 meters with huge casualties, the continuous sound of rifles sounded on the position. These shots sounded less dazzling than machine guns, but the casualties were more than that. The wave of the Soviet-Russian soldiers' charge fell down layer by layer like an onion being peeled off. At this time, Yegorov raised his glasses and stared at the situation on the battlefield. He observed keenly and found that many of the soldiers who fell on the way of the army's charge were veterans with keen technical and tactical movements and officers with pistols. These Romanians are consciously dismantling the morale of the stormtroopers. This shows that Romania's shooting level is very high, and it is not comparable to the vast majority of Soviet-Russian soldiers who have just been drafted into the army. It seems that the soldiers can't use a counter-fire with Romania, which will be a big loss. This is the army of the foreign powers. I didn't expect that we are so far away from it. Yegorov, who had summed up the experience and lessons in his heart, felt that he had seen it almost, and said to Smerga, who was commanding the battle beside him, "Let the soldiers retire and come back. I have seen it almost." With the order for Soviet Russia to retreat, the Soviet Russian soldiers, who were about to collapse on their own, fled back like rabbits. A tentative attack specially performed. For Yegorov left thousands of Soviet Russian soldiers in a pool of blood. However, he believed that the attack was worthwhile, at least saving tens of thousands of Soviet Russian soldiers. Without this attack, how could he see the true strength of the Romanians? Moreover, the Allied armies dominated by Britain and France have nearly 1 million in Soviet Russia. If there is no such temptation, they will suffer a great loss when facing them in the future. I didn't expect the Romanians to be so strong now. I don't believe it if I didn't see it in person. With a wry smile, Yegorov told Smerga, who was beside him, his feelings. "Yeah, I couldn't believe it before I played against them." Smerga responded with a more bitter smile to Yegorov. After all, this attack was completely a death sentence, and it was still sent to his own subordinates. It's not bad that he can make a smile. Do you really want him to laugh happily? After learning about Romania's strength on the front line, Yegorov rushed back to the Western Front headquarters overnight. As soon as he entered the door, Stalin, who stayed behind, asked, "How is the situation?" Facing Stalin's question, Yegorov answered truthfully, "Very bad. This is not Smerga's problem. Is the Romanian army really that strong?" Stalin was a little surprised by Yegorov's words. "Yes, on the front I feel like facing Germans." No, it should be facing Germans 16 years ago. Feeling that what he said a little boosted the opponent's ambition, Yegorov added, "The main reason is that the gap in weapons and equipment is too large. The charge of the group we are good at is completely like dying." Hearing Yegorov's words, Stalin was a little silent. If it is really like facing the Germans for 16 years, then the 500,000 people of their Western Front will definitely not be considered an advantage. After all, there are more than 400,000 people on the opposite side, and the equipment gap is too big to fight. Seeing the silent comrade Steele, Yegorov tried to ask, "Can we ask Moscow for some more reinforcement?" It is not that Stalin did not consider Yegorov's words, but just because reinforcement are needed for 2 days after the battle, this will make the central government see how the Western Front sees him, and how he sees Stalin. As a qualified communist, it is not his style to find a superior when there is difficulty. So in the face of Yegorov's request for help, Stalin retorted, "Comrade Yegorov, we can't stop fighting, because the enemy has a great advantage. The central government has mobilized the greatest support it can, and we need to test us at this time. It's time for military capability. So we need to solve the problem by ourselves, rather than let the superiors figure out a solution for us." Otherwise, what is the role of the central government sending us to lead the Western Front? Stalin's words made Yegorov a little ashamed. After serving as the commander of the front army, he always fought against the white bandit army, and some forgot how to fight against strong enemies. When facing them, he became a little timid. After thinking about it and readjusting his mentality, Yegorov said, "Comrade Stalin is right. I did worry about gains and losses before. The communists should not be overwhelmed by the difficulties at hand. The Romanians are not invulnerable, they must have weaknesses and loopholes." Yegorov, who put down his psychological burden, began to carefully observe the battle map and tried to find a feasible method. This search is 2 days. During this period, Stalin ordered the addition of food and water. Others are forbidden to disturb the commander. I found it. Ha, I found it. Yegorov, who looked haggard, shouted in the war room. Stalin, who had just received the news, pushed in the door and asked, "Have you found their weakness?" Seeing that it was Stalin, the political commissar, Yegorov said quite restrained, "This is not Romania's weakness, and it is a small reverie of their defense." Chapter 433 Luosu Conflict 8. An armed reverie. Yes, after Yegorov finished speaking, he pulled Stalin to the battle map that he had already remembered in his mind, and said, "Look, the Romanians' deployment of troops is mainly concentrated on the middle and northern routes. Among them, the Romanian central route is based on Kalalovka. Because there is a railway to Kiev, this unit is also deployed. The largest road, reaching 210,000 troops, and its artillery, machine guns and other equipment are also the most. And the tentative attack of the 14th Army on it proved that it is completely inadvisable to attack." After talking about the most powerful mid-lane, Yegorov went on to talk about the other 2 routes. The northern Romanian line, because the terrain is less undulating, it is easier for us to pass through, so the Romanians have 130,000 troops here. If we turn here to attack, it is completely inadvisable, because less troops are useless, and more troops are easy to be penetrated from the front. Having said the north, he began to speak of the southern front, which was the least armed in Romania. And on the southern front, because of the terrain and the lush vegetation, Romania has only 70,000 people deployed here. This is their smallest front line point. So you want to fight their southern line? Facing Stalin's inquiry, Yegorov said unabashedly, "Yes, the southern line is our only chance point." After he finished speaking, he pointed to the battle map, the point of defense of the Romanian army on the southern line, a town called Nemirov, and said, "There is the road from Vinitsa to Uman, and I knew that this is a road that can parallel 3 times. The road is a truck, so as long as we can get here quickly, we can go straight to Vinitsa." At this time, our frontline troops immediately entangled the enemy in the middle and the northern front, creating opportunities for the detouring troops to take Vinica. Stalin looked at the location of the town of Nemirov on the operational map. Will this inconspicuous town really become the key point for Luosu and the 2 armies to decide the outcome? At this moment, it is difficult for him to make a decision. Then can we approach this town without being discovered by the enemy? After thinking for a while, Stalin asked the key point. You must know that Romania is currently in the air, but there are planes reconnaissance at any time. Even Berdichev where they are located, these pesky Romanian flies come twice a day. And between this small town of Nemirov and Katatin, the main gathering place of the Western Front Army, there are many times a day to go back and forth. I've thought about this for a long time. Yegorov pointed to the area marked as woods on the combat map and said, I plan to rely on the cover of these trees and vegetation to use the nocturnal marching method. And in order to block the enemy's possible reconnaissance, I will send 3 times the reconnaissance force. Clean up this piece. The premise of implementing this plan is that it cannot be discovered by the enemy, otherwise the raiding troops will suffer huge losses. Then how many troops are you planning to send? In the face of Stalin's inquiry, Yegorov stated his plans and thoughts. I plan to send all the 6th and 9th armies out and strengthen the machine guns and artillery in the front army warehouse to fight them. The success of this raid is our only chance. The force must have an absolute advantage, and the firepower also needs to be strengthened. Stalin, of course, also knew what Yegorov said about the 6th and 9th armies. The 6th army is a relatively well-known force. participated in, defeated Udinage's attack on St. Petersburg, and repelled Denikin's peeping on Moscow. It is definitely a force capable of fighting well. The 9th Army also performed well in repelling the Kolchak attack point. The two troops combined approached 200,000 people, basically composed of soldiers with rich combat experience, who were competent for the task of the sneak attack point. However, Yegorov said one of the difficulties, but if we want to sneak attack on our opponents, we cannot let them find out that we are abnormal. If we have 200,000 fewer people, the other side must be alert. If this problem is not solved, the risk we take it can't be lowered. Hearing Yegorov's words, Stalin thought about it and said, this is easy to handle. 200,000 troops is not a small number. No matter how tightly we block it, the enemy can detect it. Thinking that Stalin was going to block the news, Yegorov quickly stopped him and said it would not work. Seeing that Yegorov wanted to change his mind, Stalin said directly, I also know this. Of course, 200,000 people cannot rely on blocking news. I plan to add 200,000 people. To enter we don't have 200,000 people. I know, but the Ukrainian government has it. Stalin's proposal opened Yegorov's mind. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that Stalin's method was better, as the Ukrainian Soviet government, which was supported and controlled by the Soviet Union, of course, it also expanded its army to liberate Ukraine. So since the occupation of Kyiv, the Ukrainian Red Army has recruited more than 200,000 people. However, these soldiers were not trained, coupled with insufficient ordnance, so they were not transferred to the front line to fight. This happened to be cheaper for Stalin and them. After solving the hidden dangers caused by the vacancy, Yegorov and Stalin discussed the issues of supplies, ammunition, and marching routes overnight. After 2 days of preparation, in the evening hours, the 6th Army, as the vanguard, took the lead from Katatin. Stalin and Yegorov personally practiced it for them. Comrade Sklev, your actions this time will become the key point of this battle. As long as you succeed, the Romanians will definitely lose. And I think only your 6th Army and you will be able to accomplish this arduous task. 9th Army. On the side of a large road outside Katojing, Comrade Steele spoke earnestly to the commander of the 6th Army, Sklev, who was about to set off, and said the importance of this mission. Please rest assured, Comrade Political Commissar, our 6th Army will definitely complete the task we have delivered. We will not let the motherland disappoint us. Sklev, in uniform, assured the two chiefs. This time we are waiting for good news from you. Yegorov, who felt that he needed to say something, thought that he had already told them all his plans, so he could only say some words of blessing. Don't worry, take care. Looking at Sklev, who mounted his horse and marched away with his subordinates, Stalin turned to Yegorov and said, now that they have been sent out, we can only wait for news. Yes, Yegorov sighed and replied, then continued, at present, only 30,000 people in Ukraine have rushed to Katatin, which is impossible. The 9th Army will also set off tomorrow, and no one will fill the vacancy. I have already urged the Kyiv side, and they said that 80,000 people are on their way. Of these, 50,000 will be there tomorrow. As for the other troops, they are currently on their way to us. Stalin's words made Yegorov feel much better. Hope all goes well this time. Chapter 434 Luosu Conflict 9. In Nemirov, Tochenko is packing. Sleeping bags, compass, gauze, shovel, socks and other tools needed in the field. He checked them one by one and packed them. After doing this, he checked that his military boots were not cracked. After doing this, he was satisfied. Tosik is very satisfied with life in the current military camp. Forgot to mention, Tochenko is a local Ukrainian. During Tsarist Russia, he was drafted into the army and fought many battles. However, after the fall of Tsarist Russia, he was tired of staying in the chaotic Russian army, so he returned to his hometown of Nemirov to live. In addition to renting a small plot of land, he often hunts in the nearby mountains. Although the small days are not enjoyable, they are still decent. However, after the merger of RO, the local government mobilized him to join the Romanian army after learning that he was a former soldier. Originally, he was reluctant at first. After all, he was freed from the war. Who would want to live a life where life and death cannot be controlled by themselves? However, the conditions given later made Toshik's heart move. as long as he joins the army, gives him the rank of sergeant, and has a salary of 70 lei a month, which is not bad for Toshik, who is a little poor. So after the local government looked for him 3 times, he agreed to enlist again, but this time in the Romanian army. During this period in western Ukraine, Romania recruited more than 10,000 people to join the army. They were divided into 5 recruit regiments for recruit training in Lviv, Vinnytsia, Uman, Odessa, and Kamenets. Here they have to learn simple Romanian, so that they will not be conducive to communication after entering the army in the future. This is also Edel's experience of learning from the motherland of later generations. It is completely unfeasible to form a single army of all ethnic groups in Europe now. This is training soldiers for those separatist forces. As for Toshik, it's different from recruits. He did not join the recruits, but directly joined the combat unit. And after joining the army, he immediately served as the squad leader, with 10 soldiers in charge. This time they were assigned the task of patrolling the forest, so Toshik brought out his hunting habits. Just in case, have everything ready. After everything was ready, Toshik checked the preparations of his soldiers. He was satisfied with the result, and everyone completed all the preparations well. After all, with his squad leader taking the lead, how could the soldiers not follow along? Okay, let's go. The platoon leader is probably waiting for us under the leadership of Toshik. The soldiers packed their backpacks and lined up to follow him outside. Toshik, just waiting for your 3rd shift. After seeing them appear, the platoon leader had already been waiting here, said the other soldiers. Set off. So Toshik took the soldiers and followed the team to the mountains. A group of people wearing non-slip military boots climbed mountains and waded through water and walked in the snow-covered mountains and forests. Bare trees, elusive animals, and the winter forests are so desolate. And they carried heavy items and walked hard in the forest. Everyone was tired and sweating profusely. There's a post in front where we can spend the night there. The platoon leader pointed to a mountain ridge in front of him and cheered his soldiers. Sure enough, after hearing that they could have a house to rest for the night, the group quickened their pace. The wooden sentry spire, which was faintly visible at first, became more and more exposed as they walked. Look, isn't this coming soon? The platoon leader continued to cheer on his soldiers, and the more he walked into the sentry tower, the more Toshik felt his heartbeat panic, as if something bad was waiting for him at the sentry tower. When approaching 500 meters, the crows scattered around the tower caught his attention. The hunting experience made him immediately feel that something was wrong. Wait a minute. The platoon leader, who was caught by Toshik, turned around and asked, Toshik, what's the matter? Toshik said amazingly, look at the birds around the post, these are crows. Crow, what happened to the crow? The platoon leader, who had not yet reacted, looked at Toshik in a circle. Seeing the platoon leader still didn't understand, Toshik said directly, platoon leader, it is not easy for crows to find food in winter. If there are corpses, they will be the first to arrive. When I was hunting before, if I found a crow in front of me, be sure to rush over to see it as soon as possible. Now the platoon leader understands that there is a problem at the post, but he understood a little too late. Crack, clap, clap. Several shots were fired in a row, causing the platoon leader to have several bloodstains on his body. At the same time as he heard the gunshot, Toshik felt his scalp tingle and his hat disappeared. I only felt that the top of my head was numb and cold, and there was blood stains when I touched it. Enemy attack covered. The deputy platoon leader took the lead to find a stone and hid. The other Romanian soldiers also quickly found their own bunkers, ready to fight back. Among them, Toshik saw a small depression, and one rolled and hid in it. Only at this time did he realize that he was lucky, except that his scalp was bruised by sassafras. He didn't have any other scars. In fact, this is not his luck, but the platoon leader around him attracted too much firepower at this time. The training ability of Romanian soldiers can be seen. After their respective hiding, the Romanian soldiers each took out their weapons and began to fight back. The only Madsen machine gun in the platoon also began firing on the attackers. For a time, the two sides began to shoot each other at a distance of 200 or 300 meters. At this time, a burst of Russian came, and Toxic, who could understand these words, used Romania, who had only recently learned it, to say loudly to his comrades, "It's the Russians, They are going to charge point. Sure enough, as his voice fell, a large wave of Soviet Russian soldiers rushed down from the mountain ridge. At first glance, Tochenko saw that this was a company of Soviet Russian soldiers. The comrades he reminded were shooting faster at this time, and some even stood up and aimed at the enemy regardless of their own safety. Despite the heavy fire of Romanian soldiers, the distance of just 200 or 300 meters was reached in less than a minute. So after a few rounds of bullets, the fighters on both sides immediately scuffled together. Tochenko also confronted a Soviet Russian soldier. Killed Soviet Russian soldier raised his bayonet mounted rifle and stabbed at him with a stride. And Toxic, who knew Russia's combat skills by heart, gave the bayonet sideways when the bayonet was about to come to him. He didn't wait for the enemy to retract and a gun, but slammed into the opponent's face. The opponent, who was hit hard, immediately released the rifle and covered his face involuntarily. At this time, Toshik solved the opponent with a backhand thrust. Unlike Toshik, who understates his opponents, many Romanian soldiers struggled hard because they were unfamiliar with the Russian way of fighting. Let's die together. A seriously wounded Romanian soldier threw off the lead of his grenade and flew towards the enemy. The Romanian soldiers, using their years of training and blood, are still pulling back the situation little by little. Gradually, there were many fewer soldiers standing on this land. In the end, because of the huge casualties, the remaining dozen or so soldiers of the Soviet Union retreated back, and the Romanian soldiers were barely able to breathe, and they were all injured. Even Toshik was injured on the shoulder. At that time he fought a vicious enemy and finally took down the opponent at the expense of the shoulder. Toshik, come here. The badly wounded deputy platoon leader called him. What's up? Tochenko walked up to him and saw that the deputy platoon leader had multiple injuries to his thighs, abdominal wall and waist. After seeing Tochenko, the deputy platoon leader took his hand and said, because you are familiar with this place, so now you must send the news of our attack back to Nemirov. Tochenko is also a veteran who has experienced war, so he did not continue to say what his mother-in-law said, but nodded and replied, I'll go now. Go. Tochenko picked up an unknown hat, took his pistol from the platoon leader, and left. He knew that his comrade in arms would not be able to go back, and judging from the fact that a company of Soviet Russian soldiers had taken a day's journey from Nemirov, this time Soviet Russia had a big plan. You must rush back to report. Seeing the figure of Tochenko gradually disappearing, the deputy platoon commander called the remaining soldiers. Any one of you tell a joke, I want to hear it now. Chapter 435 Luosu Conflict 10. In the early morning, Nemirov started a new day. At this time, I saw two soldiers holding a soldier in a dirty military uniform with blood on it, and ran to the headquarters in the middle of the town. After putting it into the command center, an officer stepped forward and asked, what's going on? One of the soldiers said, report sir, we are sending this soldier here. He said his name is Tochenko, and he is the squad leader of the 3rd platoon of the 7th company of the 1204th regiment of the 23rd division. They were attacked at the post and needed to be interviewed. See the commander. After hearing this, the officer continued to ask with a serious expression, you tell me everything about the whole process. Good sir. In the accounts of the two soldiers, the officer learned, while patrolling around, they encountered Toshik. It was obvious that Toshik, who ran back overnight, fainted from exhaustion after telling the story of their platoon being attacked. After all, a man who has run in the snow all day and night can't stand it. Okay, I see. You go back. The officer let the two soldiers go. At this time, I suddenly heard the military doctor who was helping me say, you are awake. The officer stepped forward immediately and asked, hello, Toshik squad leader. Can you repeat the attack to me? Tochenko looked at the officer with the lieutenant colonel on his shoulders and immediately replied, no problem. Then Toshik repeated everything they had encountered to the officer. After listening to what happened to Toshik and his platoon, the lieutenant colonel stopped writing and said to him, okay, Toshik squad leader, the branches you mentioned are important, and I will report to the superior immediately. You worked hard Take a rest first point. After asking the military doctor to send Tochenk to rest, the lieutenant colonel immediately came to the third floor of the headquarters and knocked on the door. Come in point. The lieutenant colonel pushed open the door and went in, and there was Lieutenant General Ankada sitting inside. Point. Report, Your Excellency Lieutenant General. There is a piece of information that needs your attention. Point. After finishing speaking, the lieutenant colonel told him what Tochenk reported. Point. After listening to the report of the lieutenant colonel, Lieutenant General Ankada immediately found the location of their attack from the military map hanging on the wall. Point. It seems that the enemy is really here. Point. As a very capable general in Romania, there is nothing to be done quietly about being placed in Nemirov. This style is obviously not his style, but it just appeared. Obviously either his personality has changed, or there are other reasons. For now, it's clearly the latter. After muttering in a low voice, Lieutenant General Ankada immediately ordered the lieutenant colonel, "Now prepare to draft an order." Yes, every division immediately entered a state of preparation for engagement, and the weapons previously distributed were dispatched to the grassroots company. At the same time, a report was sent to Admiral Farid, saying that the enemy was coming. In addition, it was sent to the 1st Division of the Guard in Vinnitsa. "Let them send strong troops to reinforce us immediately." With the order of Lieutenant General Ankada, the Romanian army on the southern front of the Nemirov line entered a state of war. Weapons such as machine guns and mines, which were stored in large quantities in each division, were distributed to each company, and soldiers rushed to their respective fortifications, waiting for the appearance of the enemy. Point. I believe their waiting time is not too far back. Point. And when Lieutenant General Ankada's telegram was sent to Admiral Farid, the youngest admiral waved his arm with the telegram. "Now, let me see how you run." Point. Draft an order immediately. Point. The communication staff present immediately took out a pen and paper, ready to write out the admiral's order. The cavalry divisions were ordered to immediately cover the surrounding area of the battlefield, and the armored brigade arrived at Kalalovka within 12 hours. In addition, an order was given to Lieutenant General Mandev on the northern front, ordering them to launch a full-scale counterattack immediately when the enemy attacked. They are required to defeat the enemy in a short period of time, and then detour behind my current enemy to give him a fatal blow. I will entangle the enemy in the face and give him no chance to escape. With the order of Admiral Farid, the Romanian army had already woven a large net and waited for the arrival of the Soviet Russian army. At that time, it will not be up to them whether they can get out or not. Point. And on the front line of Nemirov, it didn't take long for the Romanian army to wait, and Soviet Russian soldiers emerged from the mountains one after another. When they saw the Romanian soldiers who were ready to fight, they jumped up without any hesitation. Point. Behind them, weapons such as artillery and machine guns brought by the shoulder-to-shoulder resistance also launched long-range attacks on the defending soldiers after rapid deployment. Point. The Romanian soldiers on the position, facing the pounce of the Soviet Russian army, immediately gave it a violent counterattack. The light and heavy machine guns swept towards the enemy one after another, and the artillery at the rear told the opponent a truth in a more violent way than the enemy, and he could not be ignored. Point. Romania fought back violently on the position, and the attacking Soviet Russian soldiers could not lift their heads. However, a steady stream of soldiers behind him are constantly coming towards them. Point. Because Yegorov, the commander of the front, told Sklev, who was in command of the battle, before departure, "In the face of Romania's battle, you must not shoot at them, you must use your advantage in numbers and rush into fight against them. And even if the early casualties are too large, we must persist, because he will drag the enemy's other two paths, creating the most favorable opportunity for him to capture Vinnitsa." Point. And now that the battle is taking place, it is clear that Sklev listened. Teams of Soviet Russian soldiers were thrown into this roulette by him, just to add to their winning chips. The continuous casualties did not make him frown. For this first battle with a foreign power, he did everything he could. Point. After 3 hours of hard fighting, the effect of continuously investing in the offensive finally showed. Point. Attack in point. The Soviet Russian soldiers, who suffered huge casualties, finally rushed to the first position, and their tragic battle with the Romanian soldiers had just begun. Point. Sklev, who was standing behind to observe the battle on the front line, finally stretched his tense expression This kind of life-threatening battle, if there is no result, the pressure on the soldiers will increase exponentially, and now at least the results have come out. On the other side of the battlefield, a staff officer was reporting to Lieutenant General Ankada. Report: the first line position has been gradually abandoned, and the soldiers on the current position are slowly retreating to the second position. Very well. You go down. After sending the officer away, Lieutenant General Ankada said to himself, now the Soviet Russian commander must think that this is his credit. If it hadn't been to give you hope, I wouldn't have sent it so early. I will give you the front line position. I hope you will not let me down in the next battle. After speaking, Lieutenant General Ankada looked into the distance. The direction he was looking at was exactly the mid lane of Fleet's own commander. Lieutenant General Ankada seems to be saying, it's up to you now. Equals. Chapter 436 Luosu Conflict, 11. When Nemirov's Lieutenant General Ankada held off the Soviet 6th and 9th Army groups, Yegorov also fulfilled their promise. On the Kalilovka line, Soviet troops were attacking Romanian positions on the battlefield. The Soviet-Russian army rarely used artillery to fight guerrilla warfare, but had an artillery battle with Romanian artillery. Of course, what gave them such confidence was that Yegorov brought out his old foundation to fight this battle. Hundreds of 100mm, 122mm, and 152mm cannons boosted the artillery's morale and enhanced their strength. This is like the behavior of the beggar and the Dragon King compared to the baby, so that the Soviet and Russian artillerymen can see what the real power of the artillery group is. The return of thousands of cannons caused heavy casualties to the Soviet and Russian artillery. In just 1 hour of artillery duel, 347 of the more than 500 Soviet and Russian cannons were destroyed, of which the loss rate of cannons with a caliber of 100mm or more reached 87%. It can be said that the artillery force of the Western Front has lost its operational capability as a campaign level. The huge loss of artillery. Yegorov, who was on the battlefield, was bleeding. He kept saying in his heart, Sklev, you must complete the combat objective, otherwise this loss will be in vain. Of course, as a supporting weapon to cover the infantry, the Soviet and Russian artillery can be said to be very qualified this time. Because this time, the Soviet-Russian infantry had rushed to the front line to fight with the defenders. This instead made Yegorov worry about gains and losses and continue to invest in troops to expand the results. Or is it better to just drag the enemy? The dilemma made Yegorov a little unsure of what to do. On the opposite side, Admiral Friet led a group of generals and officers to watch the situation on the battlefield. Among them, Brigadier Hoffman of the Armored Brigade was also among them, and through his general uniform and a general star on his shoulder, it was obvious that he was promoted. Major General Hoffman, do you think the opposing commander will continue to expand the input of troops? After putting down the telescope in his hand, Admiral Friet asked Hoffman, who was beside him. Under the envious gazes of others, Hoffman walked up to the admiral and replied, it doesn't matter whether he is invested or not, because our counterattack is about to start. Our opponents, there are too many people who are even tanks. I don't know what it looks like. It is clear that Hoffman despises the current Soviet-Russian army. Hearing Hoffman's words, Admiral Friet frowned a little, but then smiled slightly. After thinking of something, continue to say, so when you counterattack next, where do you plan to break through? Hoffman pointed to the place with the largest number of Soviet troops and said, break through from their point at this time. Someone behind him said, that is the enemy's 8th Army, a relatively well-known army in its country, which has defeated the White Guards many times. Admiral Friet ignored the words of the people behind him, but asked with great interest, what's the reason? The question from His Excellency led Hoffman to answer, because I saw them charging the hardest and having the highest morale. Interesting. In Hoffman's view, no country currently has a high understanding of armored operations. This time, he intends to teach the Soviet Union an unforgettable lesson, letting them know that they cannot withstand the flood of steel in Romania by relying on these tactics. Since it is to be unforgettable, the hardest bones must be knocked out first. From the performance on the battlefield, the enemy, the 8th Army, is worthy of this name. In his mind, Admiral Friet obviously guessed That's why I said something interesting at the end point. Yes, genius must have its own pride, and it is obvious that Hoffman is exposed in this waypoint. While the two were talking, another wave of Soviet and Russian troops rushed towards the line of defense. It seems that Yegorov still couldn't resist the temptation, and he increased his troops. At this time, it can be found that Admiral Friet has a smile on his mouth. The arrival of the reinforcement made the Soviet-Russian soldiers who were fighting with Romania cheered up, and they once again threw themselves into the battle. Kill a Soviet-Russian soldier roared with his rifle, raised and swooped at a Romanian soldier. The Romanian soldier he was targeting was just pulling his bayonet rifle from the body of one of his comrades, apparently just taking out his opponent. Failing to guard against the opponent who suddenly appeared, the Romanian soldier also followed in the footsteps and fell in a pool of blood with the opponent he killed. And attacking when the opponent is not prepared. This kind of behavior that was despised in the Middle Ages has long since disappeared. In the long river of history, modern warfare has long been used for everything. As long as you can win, everything will be good. Obviously, this Soviet-Russian soldier also applied what he had learned, allowing himself to survive in this surer field for a while longer. Retreat. With a shout, the Romanian soldiers on the position retreated to the rear. Seeing the enemy retreat, the surviving Soviet soldiers raised their weapons and shouted. And Yegorov, who was watching the battle from a distance, also waved his arm vigorously. He was hesitant to send reinforcement before, but now it seems that this move is the right move, and the result is that he has won a first-line position. Now he must consolidate the current achievements and make a sufficient foundation for the next battle. Thinking of this, Yegorov immediately issued an order, requesting that another army be dispatched to preserve the hard-won results. So, a third wave of reinforcement then arrived at the positions just captured. So after the troops were sufficient, the Soviet and Russian troops who had just seized the position immediately invested in the reinforcement of the position. They used shovels and other tools to fill in many craters, and the machine gun positions were also reinforced, just waiting for Romania to counterattack. Strangely, though, the Romanian soldiers didn't seem to be at all worried about their positions being taken. The left can't wait, the right can't wait. The Soviet-Russian officers in command of the position sent a team of soldiers to try to attack the next battlefield. At this time, Romania's counterattack was revealed. Many weapons on the position shot at Soviet Russia, and artillery fire also covered it. However, the Soviet Russian officers who commanded their battles always felt that something was different. He didn't know the whole story from his mouth until he questioned the returning soldier. The soldiers who originally charged said that they felt that the firepower of Romania's follow-up positions was much worse than that of the front line. Although it was still so violent, it always gave him a chance to breathe. Thinking this situation was suspicious, the commander of the position immediately reported the situation to Commander Yegorov. When Yegorov heard the news, he immediately said loudly, "No, Romania wants to run." Chapter 437 Counterattack 1. Thinking of the consequences of Romania's calm retreat, Yegorov couldn't sit still. He immediately ordered, "Let the frontline soldiers attack immediately, and the Romanians cannot escape. I will send reinforcement to follow." With Yegorov's order, the smoke of gunpowder immediately filled up again. The battlefield, which had been quiet a while ago, immediately became lively. Offensive, for the Soviets' political commissars at all levels with pistols in their hands immediately drove the soldiers to rush towards the enemy positions. Open fire and knock the enemy down for me. At the position, Romanian officers were also commanding the soldiers to counterattack. Soldiers raised their rifles to shoot at distant enemies, and machine guns slammed back against the Soviet attack. However, Romania's violent counterattack did not dispel the determination of the Soviet and Russian troops, because before departure, the commanders at all levels informed the soldiers that the Romanian army was dying, and they wanted to escape. Violent resistance now, just to get out of contact with them. After hearing the commander's words, the morale of the Soviet-Russian soldiers soared. The enemy wanted to escape, and the Soviet fighters could never let them do so. so even if the enemy's firepower is fierce, they are not afraid. While the soldiers of the two armies of Luosu were fighting on the battlefield, on the observation post at a high altitude, Admiral Friet was watching the situation on the battlefield with satisfaction. Standing behind him were several generals: Major General Derimatou, the commander of the 2nd Division of the Imperial Guard; Major General Borks, the newly appointed commander of the 3rd Division; Major General Fokter, the commander of the 7th Division; and Major General Hoffmann, the armored brigade commander. Admiral Friet looked at the generals in front of him and asked, "Are your troops ready? Already prepared? Do you know what to do next?" "No." Defeat the enemy's attack, launch a counterattack, and cause maximum damage to the enemy. The answers of several generals made Admiral Friet very satisfied. He glanced at his watch and continued, "It's 13:16 in the afternoon, and at 13:45, you would attack. I think at this time, they should be entangled with the soldiers on the ground." It was too late to react. Clear go. After the generals left, Lieutenant General Andrew, the chief of staff, stepped forward and asked, "This time the Soviet Russian army can enter the trap. It seems that the commander on the opposite side is limited." To Andrew's words, Admiral Friet replied, "I have known the opposite commander Yegorov, who is a capable officer. However, as the commander of a 500,000 strong army, he is still a little short. For many years, I have felt a little difficult to lead more than 400,000 troops this time. Don't talk about him." Admiral Friet was right. As an officer who graduated from the Kazan Infantry Officer School in 1905, after the Soviet Revolution, Yegorov joined the Soviet Army as a major, and at the end of 1919, he was able to command an army of 500,000 people, and even if the god of war was resurrected, he would not be able to control it freely. Therefore, in terms of control of the battle situation and insight into the battlefield situation, Yegorov is still a lot worse. So this time he didn't lose. Andrew was just making an excuse, and saw him continue to ask, "So what do you think will be the result of this battle?" "I don't know this. It needs to see the hard work of the soldiers." Friet faced Andrew's question, and answered very officially. But in the end, the victory was already in his hands, and he couldn't help but said, "But I think that, if I can't reach half of the enemy, I will be very disappointed." Half of it is to wipe out 250,000 enemies. Andrew feels that this goal is a bit high. However, when he thought that the commander of the other side had walked all the way into the trap, he still didn't know this result was very possible. Right here, a staff officer quickly ran in. Report, a telegram from Lieutenant General Mandiv on the left. Riyadh army has already defeated the enemy in front of us, and the enemy's 16th Group Army is fleeing. Our troops will encircle the middle road in a rushing attitude. Lieutenant General Mandiv, call. Hearing the good news, Andrew said immediately, "This time the enemy can't escape." Yeah, it's up to us next. While the two were talking, the battle on the ground had already heated up. The Soviet Russian army had already attacked the position with huge casualties, and the Romanian soldiers were not allowed to fight with them this time. Attack. Don't let the enemy escape. A Soviet Russian commander stood at the edge of a trench, cheering loudly to his soldiers, who were entangled with a group of defending Romanian soldiers. Two Soviet Russian soldiers, holding rifles with bayonets, were confronting the same number of Romanians. The roars and screams that came from the ears made the atmosphere of the scene even more solemn. Kill. A Soviet Russian soldier who could no longer bear the torment shouted and stabbed the opponent in front of him. When the Romanian soldier he targeted, when he saw his opponent stab, he slapped his rifle in the direction of his stab, and the comrades beside him saw the opportunity, and astride stepped forward, handed the rifle in his hand, and stabbed the opponent. It seems like a chain reaction. How can the comrade in arms beside this Soviet Russian soldier make his own people suffer? Immediately greet the opponent with a block to buy time for your comrades to retreat. It's just that the Romanian soldiers who had blocked before had already freed their hands and immediately followed up with a punch. The two fists were no match for the four hands, and the soldier named his comrade who blocked the attack fell in a pool of blood. Virisi. Seeing his comrades fall to the ground, the Soviet Russian soldier who took the lead in attacking shouted, and his eyes were red. This time, he ignored it, and every time he only attacked and not defended. He was completely using the style of perishing. For a time, the two Romanian soldiers had no way to hold him point in front of a machine gun position. More than a dozen defending soldiers fought with the attacking Soviet and Russian soldiers, and many soldiers from both sides had fallen by their feet. A Soviet-Russian soldier stared at his opponent, holding the enemy's rifle tightly, preventing him from drawing the bayonet from his body. So much so that his wound was almost pierced by the enemy. On the other side, two soldiers from different countries are fighting together. They had already dropped their weapons and choked each other's necks with their own hands. Judging from the swollen purple-red faces of the two, they would suffocate to death if this continued. But judging from the fierce eyes they looked at each other, they didn't intend to let go, even if they sacrificed their lives. A life and death battle on the ground has been going on. The Soviet-Russian frontline commander, who had been unable to open the situation for a long time, became a little anxious. Suddenly he heard a rumbling sound, and the ground trembled. Chapter 438 Counterattack 2. Before the commander understood what it was, a large number of fighter jets emerged from the sky, and the shining Romanian Air Force appeared. As the latest Romanian aircraft, the Goshawk 3 fighter combines many British and French technologies. With a wingspan of 7.62 meters and a length of 9.57 meters, it is a biplane. The strong power of up to 210 horsepower supports it to become an aerial killer. At this point, Austria-Hungary and the Germans have the most say. There were not many types of aircraft in Soviet Russia before, and all lived under its sphere. In addition to the Goshawk II fighters in the air, there are also DH-10 bombers imported from the United Kingdom by Romania. As the most outstanding bomber of World War I, the DH-10 bomber has a little reputation. The main reason is that he participated in the war too late, so he did not leave a splendid name. The empty weight is 2533 kilograms, and the maximum takeoff weight is 4082 kilograms. The maximum level flight speed is 199.5 kilometers per hour. The practical ceiling is 5335 meters, and the range is 965 kilometers. 4 7.7mm caliber US machine guns with a bomb load of 626 kilograms. Let Romania see its performance at a glance, and introduce technology from de Havilland to produce it yourself. After the war, 80 were purchased from the British military to supplement their own bombers, so when these air overlords appeared over the Soviet-Russian army, all they showed was the fear of death. Whoa, 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 the bomb that fell from the sky made the Soviet Russia below hurriedly find a place to hide. Click, click, click. The strafing of the machine guns in the sky made these soldiers dodge faster at this moment. The culprit who caused the earthquake before finally appeared. More than 100 Jackal tanks appeared in front of everyone, and behind them were Romanian soldiers armed to the teeth. Enemy tanks and infantry quickly order the troops to withdraw. The frontline Soviet-Russian commanders of course knew the tanks, and they could also see the infantry following the tanks. This is a trap, and at this moment only this thought appeared in the mind of the Soviet-Russian commander. Of course, he could see it, and of course Yegorov in the rear could see it too. I was fooled myself. At this moment, he didn't have time to regret. How to preserve his strength now is the most important thing. Now we must block this wave of enemy counterattacks, otherwise our western front will face the danger of collapse. Immediately gave Smilga an order to put his 14th Army on the ground. We must block the enemy's counterattack at all costs. At this moment, Yegorov was only available to Smilga's 14th Army. Speaking of which, considering the number of casualties in his troops before, let him take a temporary rest as a reserve team. The survival of the Western Front now depends on his performance. By the time Yegorov gave Smilga his order, the counter-attacking Romanian troops had already rushed to the second line positions. Because of being entangled with the defenders of the position, the Soviet-Russian army, which could not escape, was facing the disaster of annihilation. Many of the Romanian soldiers who counterattacked were armed with the famous MP-18 submachine gun. These close metal storms work just as well in the hands of the Romanians. When faced with this weapon, many Soviet-Russian soldiers went to CMOX before they could understand what it was. The Jackal tank also used its 37mm tank gun from time to time to name the gathered Soviet and Russian soldiers slaughter. One-sided slaughter. The Soviet-Russian soldiers who broke into the position were mercilessly slaughtered by these Romanian soldiers like innocent lambs. In particular, the 8th Army, which Hoffman listed as a key target, was even worse. Countless British soldiers were helpless in the face of the Romanian steel torrent. They didn't have any weapons to deal with the steel monster, so they could only watch it ravage among the soldiers. When this sense of powerlessness and fear reaches its peak, escape becomes an inevitable choice. As the first soldier to flee appeared, soldiers one after another dropped their weapons and ran to the rear. "You stop for me. Come back quickly," a Soviet Russian commander shouted desperately, but failed to turn anyone back. "You damn deserters, I represent, woo, woo." A political commissar who tried to intercept the deserter raised his pistol in an attempt to force the soldier to return to the battlefield. But unfortunately he was pushed away, and even his weapon was robbed. There are more and more Soviet Russian soldiers fleeing on the battlefield, and a rout has been formed. Go ahead. We will defeat the enemy's fighting spirit in one fell swoop. An attack command vehicle. Hoffman looked at the fleeing Soviet soldiers and gave orders in high spirits. Following his orders, the soldiers of the armored brigade drove tanks to the front line. They want to break the enemy's fighting spirit with one blow, while the enemy is still in shock. Make your own contribution to the next complete Western Front. The rumbling tanks crossed the trenches and drove the defeated army towards the front lines. The strength of the three divisions behind them continued to form fists and hit the line of defense that was torn apart by the sharp knife of the armored brigade. Fire. Why not fire? On the front line positions captured, the Soviet Russian officers loudly rebuked the machine gunners for not obeying the order. "But it's all of us in front of us now. I order you to fire, and if you don't, I'll shoot you." Tat in the end. Out of the sight of his own life, the machine gunner opened fire. But ballistically, most of the bullets were wasted by him. However, the shooting of his comrades did not give these escaped soldiers the courage to attack reflexively. They were like attacking enemy positions, ignoring their own casualties, just to escape. The counterattack on the ground, for the chasing Romanian army, was completely tickle and feeble. Most of the soldiers were hiding behind tanks, and the only sound of these bullets hitting the tanks could be heard. So soon, Romania once again hit the front line, facing the steel monsters that appeared in front of them. These Soviet Russian soldiers really had no good way. At this time, an officer who knew the method said loudly to the soldiers, "Use bundles of grenades to blow up the tracks." But it's easy to say, how can a tank under the protection of Romanian soldiers explode so well? A soldier carrying a bundle of grenades was spotted by Romanian soldiers before they ran 30 meters. After a burst of gunshots, a grenade exploded in his arms, and the soldier disappeared into the world except for a pile of blood. Keep going. With the orders of Soviet Russian officers, 2 more soldiers rushed up with grenades, but they were already noticed by the Romanian soldiers. After a burst of shooting, the 2 soldiers also fell 20 to 30 meters away from the tank. Facing the torrent of steel in Romania, the Soviet Russian army could only resist with flesh and blood. However, most of the Soviet and Russian soldiers were unable to get close to the tank, and only a few lucky ones were able to run to the side of the tank track to place the grenade. And even if these lucky ones blew up the tank, they could not escape the fate of being shot and killed on the spot. However, Hoffman would not give these Soviet troops a chance. He ordered the tanks to be stopped at a distance of 50 meters, and the infantrymen were covered with artillery and machine guns. Therefore, in the face of the many tanks that were moving the fort and the Romanian soldiers who rushed in, the Soviet and Russian troops did not block the front line for long. Yegorov, who stayed behind and witnessed all this with his own eyes, gave himself a slap in the face, causing all this to be his own reason. But before he could regret it, an officer ran up to him panting. "Report to the commander. The 16th Army was routed by the enemy. The enemy on the northern front is deterring to my rear. What equals, if you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels." Chapter 439 Defeat 1. Yegorov, who heard the news, yanked the officer to his side with his hands and asked him loudly, "What happened?" Seeing the pale-faced officer staring at him, the slightly breathless officer who was pulled quickly said, "Is it about 1:40 in the afternoon? Why are you reporting now?" "Because the 16th Army's telegraph machine was damaged, and the telephone line was cut by the enemy. The letter they sent by cavalry is here now." Yegorov was a little speechless when he heard this. Now he can't think of anything else and must solve this crisis immediately. Otherwise, the enemy will face collapse. By flanking his troops back and forth. Thinking of this, Yegorov knew that it was time to prepare to retreat. However, it is definitely impossible to walk like this, and a team must make sacrifices. At this time, he thought of the 16th Army. Yegorov let go of his grip on the officer's collar and ordered him, give Smerga an order to hold his position, and give the other brothers time to reorganize their ranks. Poor Smerga was abandoned by Yegorov, his superior, and many more. Yegorov stopped the officer who was about to leave. The officer who was stopped immediately asked, "What other orders are there?" "Comrade Commander, send a telegram to Comrade Sklev. Tell him the plan has failed and let him evacuate on his own." Because of the sudden situation before, Yegorov was so busy that he almost forgot about the 6th and 9th Army that was still fighting in Nemirov. They must be informed of the result now, or they may face a siege from the Romanian army. Of course, it is now to tell Sklev that it is unknown how many people they can get out of. After all, they need to move slowly over mountains and mountains to evacuate, and Romania has been waiting outside for a long time at this time point. After giving these orders, Yegorov also prepared to leave. He could not give the enemy a chance to capture the front commander, otherwise he would be a disgrace to Soviet Russia, and no one would be able to save him then. With Yegorov's departure, the battle is drawing to a close. But for the Romanian army, now is the time for victory. As the Soviet and Russian troops retreated from the captured positions, the Romanian counterattack began across the board. In addition to leaving a division as a mobile force, Admiral Ploiesti played all the cards in his hand. All kinds of heavy artillery shells fell on the head of the 14th Army that was finally defended by Soviet Russia. Huge artillery shells smashed on the ground, making the defending Soviet soldiers look lonely and helpless, like a lonely boat facing a huge storm. Everyone seems to be facing an earthquake, not knowing when it will end. The deafening sound of the shell explosion caused many people to bleed from their ears and nostrils. At this time they knew to pray that the shells would not fall on their heads. In fact, this kind of large caliber heavy artillery does not need to fall on the head at all. As long as it is nearby, it is likely to kill them. A large number of soldiers lost their lives without even seeing the enemy. Such fierce artillery fire made many Soviet Russian soldiers feel apprehensive. In fact, this is indeed the case. When a 305 super caliber artillery shell fell 15 meters away from a bunker, all the Soviet and Russian soldiers in the bunker seemed to fall asleep. Only from their 5-hole bleeding faces did they know that all of them were dead. The fierce and rapid artillery didn't last long, and it stopped after only an hour. This is not because Romanian ammunition is insufficient, but to facilitate the pursuit of the enemy. Because now all kinds of ammunition have opened the door to Romania. Whether it is German or British and French ammunition of the same caliber, Romania needs them, and they have them in their warehouses, and they can all be taken away. So now Romania can play the kind of shelling on the Western Front for several days, but it is not necessary. After the gunshots stopped, the defending 14th Army's position was in a mess, and there were craters everywhere like the surface of the moon. Attack following an order, with the armored brigade as the leader, the 2nd, 3rd, and 7th divisions of the Imperial Guard as the fists, and the other divisions as the 2 wings. The 14th Army was pressed in a black and dark manner. Facing the unstoppable Romanian army, the few remaining Soviet Russian artillery roared their last roar, as if to tell them that Soviet Russia would never yield. However, Romanian artillery is not vegetarian. Seeing these remnants of artillery dared to emerge, they immediately responded. The Soviet Russian artillery, who had not fired a few shots, was wiped out like this. But they gave their infantry time in the end. Shooting. Tatatay Soviet Russian Maxim heavy machine guns fired violently at the attacking Romanian soldiers. Most of the Romanian soldiers led by tanks were hiding behind them. Ding ding ding. Machine gun bullets are completely useless on tanks. Boom, boom, boom. Many heavy machine guns fired were aimed by Romanian small caliber artillery, which weakened the firepower on the position a lot. When the tanks reached a distance of 100 meters, the 37 tank guns and machine guns fired on the ground again, overwhelming the Soviet and Russian soldiers. Completely unable to lift their heads, the Romanian soldiers took this opportunity and immediately swooped up to fight with the Soviet Russian soldiers. But this time, the Soviet Russian soldiers could not take advantage of them. In terms of numbers, the first wave of Romanian soldiers was not too small, and almost everyone had an MP-18. The MP-18 with 20 rounds of ammunition, dealing with the Soviet Russian Mosin Nagant rifle, was completely a father beating his son. The 9mm pistol bullets are all good in the trenches, and those who want to kill the Soviet Russian soldiers screamed. Seeing his soldiers being defeated by the Romanian army, Smerga was furious. However, he knew that he could not act rashly now, because he was also on the mission of blocking the enemy point. When Yegorov told him that the 14th Army was needed to stop the Romanian army, he was ready to sacrifice. Because of the enemy's aircraft and tanks that were all over the sky at that time, let him know that this time he would definitely suffer. Their prediction was right, and then the Soviet Russian soldiers were easily driven out of the captured positions by the Romanians, like sheep fleeing. At this time, Yegorov told him that he needed to stick to the last soldier. Smerga knew that it was Yegorov who wanted the 14th Army to hold back the enemy at the expense of his own life and create opportunities for other troops to escape. And he has no complaints about this, because he knows that no one will be able to leave without a single army. For the ideal in his heart, he is willing to sacrifice for it. This is the perseverance of a revolutionary with an ideal heart, and now he is going to complete this perseverance. And Smerga's 14th Army did as he said, sticking to its position, even at the cost of life. So until the sun went down, the 14th Army was still holding on. Chapter 440 Defeat 2. The 14th Army under the command of Smerga, although tragically blocked the Romanian army until the sun went down. However, as the Romanian commander-in-chief, General Farit, he would not just let his prey go. The night battle was born under this circumstance. A rose flare hit the sky and illuminated the earth like daytime. The Romanian soldiers continued to fight with the Soviet and Russian soldiers against the cold wind. Attack. Crush these Russians. The Romanian officers who led the team shouted loudly that their soldiers were attacking the enemy. As he spoke, his mouth was full of white gas, and the soldiers followed the direction of his fingers and attacked the position again. Defense. Everyone waits to defend. On the other side, the Soviet Russian army commander is also calling for the soldiers to defend. Under the urging of the officers on both sides, the tired soldiers from both sides fought again. But overall, Romania has the advantage in numbers and weapons. As for the Soviet Russian soldiers, they could only use their flesh and blood to resist the enemy's attack. But how long this resistance will last, only God knows. The nighttime slaughter has continued, and now it is the physical strength, willpower and weapons and equipment of the two sides that are competing. In this case, most of the Soviet and Russian troops were at a disadvantage. There is always an end to the endless fighting, and there is a time for those who are not afraid of death to die. When the physical strength and will of the Soviet Russian soldiers reached their limits, collapse was inevitable. At the headquarters of the 14th Army Group, the sound of fighting was getting closer. At this time, an officer with blood on his body broke in, and he shouted loudly, as soon as he came in. Comrade Smerga, the enemy has broken through our defense line, and is now attacking here. For the next battle, please move immediately. This is the commander of the 14th Army Guard Company, Meretskov, who had been sent to the front by Smerga. And he has come back now to show that the situation has reached the point where it cannot be reversed. Looking at Meretskov, who escaped from the enemy's pursuit, Smerga replied indifferently, I see, you can escape. Smerga's words caused other officers in the command to look at each other. How could they leave if the commander didn't leave? Hearing Smerga's words, Meretskov said quickly, Comrade Smerga, if you don't leave, it will be too late. I can't give up my soldiers. They all died here, and I have no face to go back. After Smerga finished speaking, he checked and loaded his gun, as if to calmly face the arrival of the Romanians as a Soviet revolutionary. Seeing Smerga, who was determined to die, Meretskov suddenly said in surprise, Comrade Commander Yegorov, why are you back? As soon as he heard that Yegorov was back, Smerga turned his head suddenly and looked around. There was no one in this direction. Only then did he realize that he had been deceived. But it was too late. Meretskov stepped forward and slashed Smerga's neck with a knife, and the commander of the 14th Army fainted. Speaking slowly, in fact, in just a few seconds, Smilga was subdued by his captain of the guard. Meretskav's action stunned the other officers in the command, but someone thought of something and quickly stepped forward to support Smilga. Let's go now. I remember there are horses at the headquarters. We bypass the road and head straight for Kiev. What Meretskov said immediately made his intentions known to all officers. Many people have to admire this bold guard company commander. So under the leadership of the company commander Meretskov, the officers of this group of headquarters immediately took the necessary supplies and moved towards Kiev in the dark. When the Romanian army broke through the blockage of the 14th Army, Comrade Stalin, the political commissar of the Western Front, was already mobilizing Katatin's 200,000 troops to come to support. When Yegorov sent a telegram saying that he had been trapped by the enemy, Stalin felt that his whole heart was about to jump out. How could he be reassured that the first major defeat of the Soviet Russian army happened in his own hands? But fortunately, Yegorov said that he planned to lead the troops to retreat and needed the troops to respond. At this time, in order to cover the Ukrainian troops attacked by the 6th and 9th Army, it became the only life-saving straw for the 2. So Stalin rushed to Katatin from the headquarters immediately after receiving the telegram from Yegorov. It takes 2 hours by car on weekdays, but under Stalin's constant urging, this time it was just over an hour away. After coming to Katatin, Stalin immediately ordered the 200,000 Ukrainian troops to bring weapons and set off with him to rescue the Western Front. But no matter how urged, the 200,000 army needs to prepare a lot of things. It's not enough to eat, but you have to bring weapons and ammunition, and you have to wear winter anti-skid shoes. These Ukrainian troops were not ready until the sun was about to set. After seeing that the preparations were completed, Stalin and several officers in charge of the decent Ukrainian army discussed the route of the army and immediately arranged the departure. So in the evening of the same day, the Ukrainian army with torches divided into several groups and advanced towards Kalinovka. And following these Ukrainian troops marching against Stalin, the only thought in my mind was, Yegorov, you should bring more troops to escape. And Yegorov, who was missed by him, is currently being pursued by the Romanian army. Comrade Commander, the 8th Army reported that the 4th Army they sent to stop the enemy has been routed by the enemy. The enemy is less than 12 kilometers away from us. They asked if they would send another unit to stop it. Yegorov, who was crouched on horseback, was listening to a messenger reporting the situation. The army that pursued them was the Romanian army on the northern front, commanded by Lieutenant General Mandev. And Yegorov remembered the encounter with the Romanian army, and he shouted luckily in his heart. At that time, after Yegorov left the 14th Army to break, he led the retreating Western Front to Katatin. While crossing a bridge called Kalets, the scout cavalry reported that a troop was coming fast from the north towards the bridge, where they were at Kalets at present. In addition to the 6th and 9th Army of the Western Front, which is far away in Nemirov, there are also the 14th Army that was left in Kalilovka by itself, and the 16th Army that was repelled to the north. Other troops are here. Then this rapidly approaching force must be the enemy. At present, the fighting spirit of the Western Front troops in their hands is not high. If they are bitten by the enemy, they will be able to escape completely, so they must leave a force to defend. In the end, he chose the 4th Army of the 8th Army as a defensive force, and he immediately rushed to Katatin with other troops. In fact, Yegorov guessed correctly. This unit is indeed the Romanian army on the northern front of Lieutenant General Mandev. After they defeated the 16th Army, they immediately detoured to attack the rear of the Western Front, and the Kalets Bridge was the location of his choice. However, he did not expect that Yegorov, after seeing that the situation was not good, immediately left the troops to survive by cutting their tails, which made Lieutenant General Mandev flutter in the air. His Excellency Lieutenant General regretted it secretly. He only had to arrive half an hour earlier, and Yegorov and the main force of his Western Front could not escape. So, after seeing the opportunity slip away from his hands, he vented all his anger on the 4th Army who blocked him. In less than 3 hours, the 4th Army fled. And Lieutenant General Mandev did not care to deal with these defeated troops. He only saw the main force of the Western Front led by Yegorov. So after leaving a division to clear the remaining enemy, immediately brought other troops to pursue Yegorov. Now the report of the messenger makes Yegorov start to consider sending that unit to stop the enemy. At this time, a panting officer ran in front of him and said loudly, "Commander, the political commissar and the reinforcement have come to the village of Wadley 10 kilometers ahead of us." Chapter 441 ending. After hearing that Stalin was not far from him with reinforcement, Yegorov immediately regained his energy. He said loudly to the officer, "Inform everyone of this good news immediately. Let everyone speed up. We are saved." The news that reinforcement were just ahead greatly encouraged the soldiers of the Western Front. Everyone had a look of hope on their faces, and their footsteps became much lighter. After a fiasco, anyone can feel better with reinforcement to help them. When the chasing Romanian troops on the northern front chased after Wadri, he encountered the Soviet-Russian army, which had combined more than 300,000 troops. Lieutenant General Mandiv looked at the Soviet-Russian troops who were ready to fight and had an absolute advantage in numbers. Lieutenant General Mandiv was a little shy in his heart because of the huge disparity in troops and the increase in uncertainty about field operations. For the sake of stability, he could only order to retreat first. Watching the Romanian soldiers slowly retreat into the darkness, the Soviet and Russian soldiers present cheered as if they had won a battle. Stalin and Yegorov, who were watching the Romanian army on the front line, also eased their worries. Fortunately, the opposing commander was cautious and did not attack. Stalin saw the retreating Romanian army, and his nervousness was mostly relieved. If you mainly attack on the opposite side, you will find that you are all zibby goods here, the kind that will collapse after a hit. Only God knows how much combat power an army composed of recruits and defeated soldiers can have. Yegorov, who was chasing after retreating and letting his burden fall, immediately remembered the Soviet-Russian soldiers who were sacrificed because of his wrong decision, especially the abandoned 14th Army. Unable to bear the grief in his heart, he shed tears at Stalin, the political commissar. Comrade political commissar, I have failed the expectations of the motherland and the central government, and I'm sorry to the party and the people. The responsibility for this defeat is all my fault, and I failed to discover the other party's intentions. The commander, who was in his 30s, cried sadly like a child in front of the political commissar. Seeing his partner burst into tears, of course Stalin would not let him cry just like that, and quickly comforted, "Comrade commander, the responsibility for defeat is not only on you, but also on our entire Western Front. At present, our priority is to return to Kyiv first to ensure that the enemy will not take the opportunity to seize the most important city in Ukraine. As for the future responsibility, we will talk about it in the future." Stalin spoke words of comfort to Yegorov, among which, in his opinion, the two leaders of the Western Front were not the most responsible parties. The biggest problem is the order given to them at the center, or the wrong order caused by the overestimation of their own strength. They are nothing more than victims of this misguided order. Of course, these words can only stay in his heart, blaming the central government's decision. Not everyone has the courage to do it. Under Stalin's persuasion, Yegorov reorganized his mentality. After confirming that the Romanian army had retreated, they hurriedly retreated to Zhytomyr, Kyiv and other cities along the Dnieper River with the army overnight. The retreating Romanian army on the northern front was at the Kalets Bridge and encountered the commander of the 14th Army in the middle of the army to pursue Admiral Ferit. After hearing the news that a large number of enemy reinforcement had responded to the pursuit of the target and withdrawn, Admiral Ferit threw the military cap in his hand to the ground. Damn it, let this guy go in vain. Lieutenant General Mandiv is too cautious. Why not entangle him? The irritable admiral could not help but complain. Seeing that he was about to get full power, he didn't expect that the duck he got flew halfway away. No one complains about anyone else. Hearing Ferit's complaint, Chief of Staff Andrew stepped forward to explain. It may be that Lieutenant General Mandiv wanted to avoid too many casualties. You heard him just now. There were about 300,000 enemies at that time, and the night is not conducive to fighting. And when he chased, he didn't bring a lot of equipment, and he didn't know when we would arrive. Andrew's explanation made Ferit feel a little better, and he was indeed responsible for failing to wipe out the enemy. That damned enemy, the 14th Army, dragged itself down for too long, causing them to miss the time to pursue. Seeing that Ferit's complexion improved a lot, Andrew asked again, "Are we still chasing it now?" Hearing Andrew's question, Ferit said angrily, "What are you chasing? After a delay of one night, the enemy has already retreated. Since only half of the ducks are left, they cannot be allowed to fly away. The half duck that Admiral Ferit was talking about was obviously referring to the 6th and 9th Army in Nemirov. And what about the army that attacked Nemirov, when Yegorov telegraphed to Sklev that the plan had failed and that he needed to evacuate? The 6th and 9th Army had already attacked the 2nd Romanian line of defense on the southern front, and when his telegram arrived, it caused a heated quarrel in the headquarters at that time. One side thought that, since the plan failed, it needed to retreat immediately and could not wait for the other two Romanian troops to encircle it. On the other hand, they said that, if they go back now, the rolling mountains and forests will also become their biggest obstacle, and there cannot be too many soldiers who can return to the motherland. Because Romania is very likely to set up a blockade outside this mountain forest, as long as they go out, they will throw themselves into the net. It is better to take a gamble and turn southeast immediately after taking Nemirov, pass through Uman, where the enemy has fewer troops, and return to Cherkasy under the rule of Ukraine. Each of these two schemes has its own advantages. As long as the first scheme runs fast, there is a great chance of escaping part of the army. After all, it will take time for the other two Romanian troops to come around. But the difficulty is that a considerable part of the army will be wiped out by the enemy. The second plan, as long as they can quickly defeat the enemy in front of them, they can escape before the other two enemy forces come around. But the difficulty is that, if you can't defeat Nemirov's enemies, they will face the end of being wiped out. And these two options must be chosen as soon as possible. They can't delay the time, otherwise they will just wait for the enemy to encircle and destroy them. Sklev, who was their commander, was in a dilemma at this time. Both options were so difficult for people to choose. In the end, out of safety considerations, Sklev chose the first plan and retreated backward through the mountains and forests. Just do what he said. After making up his mind, Sklev immediately ordered the troops to withdraw, and everyone only brought sidearms and other daily necessities such as food. As for the artillery and machine guns and other equipment brought over by the shoulder-to-shoulder people, all of them were thrown away. Within 2 hours, the Soviet-Russian 6th and 9th Army entered the nearby mountains and forests again. This made the 1st Division of the Imperial Guard and the 28th Division sign vain. And Lieutenant General Ankada immediately retreated the enemy to the mountains and planned to retreat and informed General Ferit, who was still besieging and destroying the 14th Army at the time. That's why the Admiral himself said that the remaining half of the duck can't let it fly. So when the other two fronts of Romania came around, the 6th and 9th Army was already doomed to lose most of its fate. Sure enough, at the beginning of the 6th and 9th Army, when the encirclement was not completed, all but 50,000 people escaped from the encirclement, and all the others behind did not escape. When these cold and hungry Soviet-Russian soldiers appeared in the field, they were faced with Romanian soldiers who had been waiting for a long time. Faced with this desperate situation, most Soviet-Russian soldiers wisely chose to surrender. A small number of deheads were wiped out on the spot. Over the next 10 days, 110,000 Soviet and Russian troops were captured by Romania one after another. I would like to say here that during this siege, a young Soviet-Russian soldier named Defusko stayed in the forest for 3 months. After the final calm between Romania and the Soviet-Russian border, they returned to their homeland. At that time, the Soviet-Russian newspapers reported on the soldier who persisted in desperation and pushed his reputation to a very high level. In the Battle of Vinnytsia, the final official statistics, the two sides sent a total of 1 million troops to fight for the ownership of western Ukraine, and Romania won in the end. But as the price of victory, the Romanian army suffered more than 65,000 casualties. Among them, 21,573 people were killed, 43,872 people were injured, and 1,876 people were missing. As the defeated side, the Soviet-Russian army lost a total of 265,401 people this time. Among them, 67,341 people were killed, 46,243 people were injured, 134,516 people were captured, and the remaining 10,000 people were all missing persons. Chapter 442 Influence. The world cheered when Romania and Soviet Russia ended the war. In Vinnytsia point, the Wall Street Journal in the United States made a substantial report on the matter. "Freedom triumphs over evil" was the headline of the Wall Street Journal that day. In Europe, Romania's victory was widely publicized by Britain, France and other countries. In the Times report, they used a large chapter to introduce the cause of the war and at the same time criticize the Soviet-Russian invasion of Ukraine. And finally analyzed, if Soviet Russia wins this war, then its neighboring countries will surely become victims of Soviet Russia's model. Anyway, in the mouths of various European media, Romania represents the European civilized world, giving a severe blow to the evil Red regime. Let them know that the civilized world of Europe will not leave this evil regime alone, and will surely free the suffering Russian people from its clutches like the rest of Europe. People in Romania cheered the victory. For them, this is another step for their motherland to defeat the foreign powers one after another and show their strong national strength. For this reason, many newspapers regarded this victory as Romania becoming a part of a major European power and asserted that other countries must fully consider Romania's opinions when it comes to staying in Europe in the future, especially on issues surrounding Romania. On the other side of the war, the Soviet-Russian Pravda denounced Romania's territorial occupation of Ukraine. At the same time, the defeat of the Soviet Union was only a blip. He also declared that Soviet Russia and the brotherly country Ukraine will never allow Romania to illegally occupy the territory of Urk. The Soviet army will surely defeat Romania and liberate the Ukrainian people from its enslavement. Although Pravda trumpeted that Soviet Russia would not give up, the Soviet top brass now knew that Romania was not easy to mess with. Of course, they will not gather the army again to fight Romania, as the newspapers say. So on the occasion of another meeting, the various Soviet personnel and commissars began to resolve the issue of negotiations after the war with Romania. In the same parliamentary room, Kamenev, the nominal Soviet military commander-in-chief, was talking about the situation in Ukraine after the battle. After the Battle of Vinnytsia, the Western Front has retreated to areas along the Dnieper River such as Kyiv and Cherkasy. At present, the Central Military Commission has dispatched 150,000 troops from the Southwest Front and Moscow to reinforce them. Stalin and Yegorov on the front line comrade who reported that the enemy is not attacking them at present. However, the garrison in Kherson reported that the enemy has approached them. Kamenev's words immediately led to a question from a commissioner: are the Romanians trying to rescue the White Bandit army in Murek? In the face of inquiries, Kamenev replied, "We do not rule out the possibility, but the Southwest Front has now sent an army to Kherson for reinforcement." Hearing Kamenev's answer, another People's Commissar said, "We can't let the two sides converge, otherwise these White Bandit troops will be more difficult to destroy." The military council is working on plans to prevent the two sides from converging. I have a proposal. While Kamenev was talking with several People's Commissars, a voice suddenly interjected. Everyone looked up, and it turned out that Dzerzhinsky, the NKVD commissar, was speaking. Seeing everyone looking at him, Dzerzhinsky said, "Since we can't take care of domestic and foreign wars for the time being, why can't we give up one side first and concentrate on solving the other?" Only Dzerzhinsky and Lenin could say this, not even Trotsky, the founder of the Red Army. Lenin because of his great prestige, Dzerzhinsky because of his selfless qualities, known to others. In fact, before Dzerzhinsky raised it, all the People's Commissars here have thought about this issue. And anyone with a discerning eye can see that the war with Romania can no longer be fought. After all, this great defeat is a traumatic experience for the Soviet and Russian troops. No amount of Russians can be given away like this, but whoever was present was not a human being, so he was so embarrassed to say such words, to destroy one's own prestige. Only someone as selfless as Zarens could say such a thing. But everyone knows it. But the necessary objections still have to be raised. Otherwise, it is so right that the Soviets shout the slogan "Liberate all mankind" every day, which will make the Soviet soldiers and people who fought bloody battle think. Therefore, as soon as Dzerzhinsky's words fell, a People's Commissar stood up and objected. "Comrade Dzerzhinsky, we cannot change our policy because of this defeat, and the communists should not be let down by the current difficulties. We should unite more people and launch a righteous counterattack against Romania, the new imperialism. The general public in Europe is sympathetic to us, and the Romanian reactionary government will definitely be overthrown by the people. So I resolutely oppose any contact with this reactionary government, which goes against the philosophy of our Communist Party. Following the People's Commissar's speech, other members also expressed their support for him, and for a time Dzerzhinsky's issue was in danger of being rejected. Okay. Quiet everyone. Seeing that the meeting tended to be one-sided, Lenin, who was sitting in the chair, knocked on the table and said, "I can understand the mood of the comrades, but Comrade Dzerzhinsky instructed to put forward such a proposal. After all, we are a democratic centralist. Every member has the right to express his or her own opinion. Comrade Dzerzhinsky did not say that we need to negotiate with Romania, but we are currently facing problems that need to be prioritized. Let's talk about the ownership of Western Ukraine. In fact, it should not be discussed by us. This is the matter of the Ukrainian Soviet government of our brother country. Now we should only discuss the other intervening forces of the White Bandit Army." Lenin's words made the opposition much quieter. After all, as the founder of the party, Lenin had great prestige in the party, and his opinions must be fully considered. Lenin directly attributed the current problems of Western Ukraine to the Ukrainian Soviet government. Although no one here knows the Kiev government, it is their puppet. However, under the circumstance that there is no advantage at present, it is also an option to assign this issue to the Fraternal Party. After all, this is a dispute between the Ukrainian government and Romania, in the face of the party and the people. It's all about the past reasons. Seeing that Lenin's words were adopted by the People's Commissars, everyone began to punish Stalin and Yegorov, who were directly responsible for the defeat. After all, the loss of more than 200,000 people is unreasonable, and no one is responsible. Anyway, these People's Committee members know where the actual responsibility lies, so the punishment for the two is not too serious. Political Commissar Stalin was transferred to the National Economic Committee in charge of production as a member of the party, while Yegorov was transferred to the 19th Army as commander. As the results of this discussion came out, Pravda, the mouthpiece of Soviet Russia, immediately published an article. In this article, Pravda is all about the brotherly relationship between Soviet Russia and the Ukrainian government, and it also implicitly proposes that Soviet Russia is stationed here at its invitation in Ukraine. As for their domestic affairs in Ukraine, any interference in their actions is mainly based on the negotiation of brothers and neighbors anyway. The meaning of the words is that Ukraine's affairs need to be solved by Ukraine itself. Now Soviet Russia sends a metaphor to Romania through Pravda, and it depends on whether Romania can understand it. Chapter 443. Peace comes. The Soviet Russia's speech in Pravda was noticed by the Romanian government early in the morning. In fact, Romania has been waiting for news from Soviet Russia. After all, the two sides have only fought one game, and there will always be news, whether the peace talks will continue, or the fight will continue. Britain, France and other countries have also seen this report of Soviet Russia admitting council. They are quite dissatisfied with Soviet Russia's performance of shrinking back after being beaten. Because after the victory in the Battle of Vinnytsia, Britain and France encouraged Romania to continue to attack Soviet Russia. To this end, they also told the Romanian government that they would be happy to see Romania seize the entire Ukraine. The Romanian side is indifferent to the British and French paintings, and they will not take a step forward, even if they speak out. Therefore, when persuading Romania was ineffective, they put their hope on Soviet Russia, hoping that the polar bears would show their greed for the land and continue to be enemies of Romania. At present, it seems that the Soviet Russian government is not a fool. After being beaten with a stick by Romania, they consciously retracted their claws in the real power center of Romania. Edel is also discussing with the Prime Minister and the Chief of Staff and others what Romania needs to do after the Soviet Russia retreats. Your Majesty, our army has stopped military operations in Ukraine since the Soviet Union announced that they were unwilling to fight. However, they did not send negotiators. Is it really good to stop military operations like this? In case it is to solve the internal White Guards first, and the implementation of the strategy of delaying the army, the results of our battle are not enough. In front of everyone, the Chief of the General Staff, Admiral Pilishin, was expressing his opinion. As a representative of the military forces, Prezhan certainly needs to express the military's tough stance point. In fact, Pleshan's opinion was quite moderate. A large group of militants in the army shouted to take Kyiv and push the borders of the kingdom to the banks of the Dnieper. They analyzed the advantages of using the Dnieper as a border militarily, and also stated that the kingdom's army was fully capable of doing this. Even the army has a more radical view, occupying the entire territory of Ukraine. The reason given is that Romania merged with Ukraine, and Romania has a reason for occupying these places. From a legal point of viewpoint, these military forces only consider the limits of what they can do. I never thought about the contradictions between population and ethnic groups after the real occupation of these areas, the territorial contradictions that cannot be separated from Soviet Russia, and whether there is national strength to support such great ambitions in the country. But fortunately, Admiral Pleshan has a good command of the army and can suppress the voices of these militants. That's why he raised his concern about the need for a tacit understanding and peace with the Soviet Union. After all, without peace negotiations, anyone could be the first to attack the other side. In this case, their military pressure is not small at all. General Pleshan, what you are worried about is actually our concern. However, the domestic finances are not enough to continue to fight with the Soviet Union. The new territory requires a lot of financial investment, and the military has already laid enough territory for the kingdom. Please stop fighting. Because fiscal revenue is not enough to support investment in large and new territories. The financial rebuttal to Prezhan was, of course, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Lord Albert. As the minister in control of Romania's financial power, Lord Albert knows Romania's finances like the back of his hand. At present, Romania seems to have a good economic development, but since the end of the war, Romania's rapid economic development has come to an end point. Among them, the funds needed to invest in the new territories already account for 1/3 of Romania's fiscal expenditures. After deducting military expenses, Romania's finances are already very tight. If the war continues, the fiscal expenditure will reach the warning line, which will drag down Romania's economic development. For Romania, the slowdown in economic development will expose many problems. These are originally Romania can take advantage of the rapid economic development, one by one slowly resolved. If a concentrated outbreak occurs, the damage to Romania will be a long-term hazard. At this point, Lord Albert sees it very clearly. In the face of Lord Albert's words, Prime Minister Bricianu also agreed. Lord Albert is right. The army needs to restrain its desire for territory. At present, there are enough other ethnic groups in Romania. We must guarantee the advantages of the Romanian people at home. Otherwise, many of the problems that occurred in the Austro-Hungarian Empire will also appear in Romania. Prime Minister Bricianu did not oppose the military's views in other areas, but instead started from the nation. The high-ranking officials present are all from Romanian ethnicity. In this era of rising nationalism, it is impossible not to talk about the issue of the main ethnic group in the country. A universal outlook like the future generations is completely unimaginable in this era. Even Britain and France, which have vast colonies, treat non-native ethnic groups with more or less differences, and their senior officials rarely have the presence of other ethnic groups. Even though they didn't say it, they've been doing it. The Prime Minister's words made other senior officials speak. They analyzed the benefits of the armistice to Romania from various aspects, while General Pleshan ignored these opinions and only mentioned the harm of this tacit armistice. This kind of question is only raised so no one can ignore it, and the situation that others say is faced with an attitude of ignorance. This kind of cheating method made everyone present amazed. How can people's skin be so thick? Seeing that the discussion was trending towards street quarrels, Edel coughed quickly, giving way to the high-ranking ministers to pay attention. Your Majesty, what do you think about this matter? Edel's cough was still very effective. His Excellency the Prime Minister immediately turned in a contradictory move, which made him regret the previous cough point. But since the Prime Minister has already asked, and the important ministers present have expressed their opinions, Edel must come out and express his views. Everyone has their own reasons for what they say, but they all have their own priorities in the face of different situations. In the face of the Soviet Union statement this time, I think we can give the other party a chance to express goodwill. After all, we are a member of a civilized society. We have to give the other side a chance to change. so we need to respond to them with kindness. Just withdraw 100,000 troops from the Ukrainian border area and see the enemy's response first. Edel said Romania's concession first, and then continued. However, in order to prevent goodwill from being used against us by the Soviet Union, the military supplies aimed at Ukraine cannot be stopped. The fortifications that should be built still cannot be less, and the ammunition stockpiles should be replenished. It still needs to be supplemented. Everything depends on the performance of the Soviet Union. With Edel's speech, the final decision of Romania must of course be based on his suggestions, and other important ministers made additions on some minor issues. When the resolution was settled, Prezhan finally breathed a sigh of relief. In fact, he also hoped that a peaceful decision would be reached. After all, the Russian population and territory have an overwhelming advantage, and Romania has taken advantage of it at other times other than this battle, and it is his original idea to take it as soon as possible. However, this kind of thinking is not suitable for the needs of the military. As the spokesperson of the army, it runs counter to the current army thinking, which is not a good thing for him. After Edel came to power, the treatment of the army was improved several times, which increased the influence of the military on the side. Especially in several foreign wars, Romania has been the winning side, and it is not the kind that stands on the side and shouts, but also makes the military a symbol of pride in the mouth of the people. In this case, the military forces have been able to compete with the government. It's just that this is the case. That is, it's obvious during this time. However, as long as the army is not given the opportunity to continue to make meritorious deeds, the military force will gradually weaken, which is one of the reasons why the government insists on a one-sided truce. Of course, Prezhan knew that this false influence would not last, but at present he could not take the initiative to suppress it. Besides, why should the military bow to the government? They are the royal army and the government allegiance to the monarch, which is a perfect setting. Of course, it is impossible for the Romanian military to reach the current level of Japan. It is impossible to achieve this in terms of culture and cognition. The difficulty is too great, and they cannot do it. When Romania decided to respond to the Soviet Union, and made a good move, the Soviet Union gradually began to withdraw troops from the Western Front. The two sides finally restored peace to the land of Ukraine, when you dispatched an army and I dispatched an army. However, this territorial dispute in West Ukraine, which never ended, needs to see which of the two parties develops to the point where they can't help themselves first. However, before that, the instigation of Britain and France to Romania did not work, and it was very useful when it was used against another neighboring country. Chapter 444 The Romanian Communist Party 1. After the possibility of continued war between Romania and Soviet Russia was reduced, other issues arose in the government's priority plan. In Oradea, newly captured from Hungary, a secret meeting is being held here. There is a manor called Miroca in Oradea, where an old couple named Miroca lives. According to locals, the Mirocas are courteous and very helpful. Whether they are Hungarians or Romanians or other ethnic groups, they have a good sense of the couple, so this has allowed the Romanian government to let them go in several purges. Not long ago, the Miroca couple's son, who had been studying abroad for many years, came back, which made the old couple very happy and very enthusiastic to everyone. Let the surrounding neighbors feel that this couple is really a rare good neighbor. A few days ago, the old couple said they planned to travel, leaving their son to continue to take care of the family affairs. Then people nearby saw that the car the Mirocas were in left here with their luggage. Now the manor is managed by little Miroca. I heard that little Miroca was going to entertain some friends from afar, so the Miroca manor was decorated with lights. And because the neighbors are not very familiar with little Miroca, no one wants to join in the fun. Several vehicles came one after another, and they all stopped at the Miroca manor. Several well-dressed guests got out of the car, while the owner, little Miroca, greeted his friends at the door. Everything seemed so calm and leisurely. But in the room that entered the manor, everything seemed different. A group of people sat together and had a serious conversation, not at all like a gathering of friends. Our conditions are very clear. In the future, the new government can let the Hungarians decide whether to continue to stay in Romania or to vote to return to Hungary. But before that, our party needs you to provide at least 600,000 lei per month for future Hungary. The cost of man's choice of power at a long table. A young man is laying out their terms. It's too much. You must know that the Hungarians in Romania are not too rich. Many properties have been confiscated by your government. We can't get that much money. Point on the other side of the long table. A well-dressed middle-aged man refuted the other party's conditions. Hearing the other party's rebuttal, the young man immediately said loudly, "You are insincere. It is impossible to bargain for this matter. Do you know how much loss this decision will cause to our party? There are many people in the party now. I don't understand this proposal very well. It took us a long time to settle down, so this condition cannot be changed." The middle-aged man pointed out the shortcomings of the other party sharply. "But your chances of seizing the leadership of the government are too slim, and we can't put too much money on an organization. That is very unlikely. But besides us, who else can you look for? Budapest? They don't dare to make any small moves now, otherwise it will be a disaster waiting for them. I believe you know the attitude of other political parties in the country towards you very well. Ignore you. Who can help you, my friend?" The negotiation between the two was going on fiercely, while the others exchanged opinions in whispers from time to time. Yes, it was a secret negotiation, and on the side of the middle-aged were Hungarians in Romania. In the face of Romania's oppressive policy, they finally chose to fight back. Of course, this counterattack was not to stand up against Romania's rule. They are not stupid to know that this will only make them lose weight, and Bucharest knows the result with an ease on their attitude. They chose to fund secret political parties opposed to the Kingdom of Romania more secretly, but the vast majority of secret political parties were disdainful of the demands of the Hungarians. Just kidding. Messing with the Hungarians. How can I develop in the country? And I'm not afraid of being accused of betraying the country. Even pretending it doesn't work, it will make party members detached from morality. Politics is not like that. So these Hungarians have repeatedly hit a wall in this matter. But there are always people who are not afraid of death, and this time a political party finally took over the goodwill of the Hungarians. It's just that this party makes these Hungarians a little uneasy, and just listening to the name will reveal where their unease is. The Communist Party of Romania. Yes, that's right. The Communist Party of Romania. This newly established Communist Party has nothing to do with the communist country of Soviet Russia. Nor is it the party it supports. It was formed by a group of progressive young people who love Romania. Their philosophy is to establish a system for everyone to have a job, enjoy free medical care and education, so that all Romanians can live a happy life. So this is a negotiation between the Communist Party and the oppressed Hungarians to resist the reactionary government headed by Edel. And in the crowd around this long table, we found a familiar figure. Karl Morley, the former senior executive of the Youth Association, sat at this table, and from the attitude of others around him, it was obvious that he was the main person in charge of this negotiation. Seeing that the two sides have been arguing about the amount of money, Karl Morley felt a little irritable in his heart. Since Edel chose to suppress the YMCA, Karl Morley has felt a different emotion in the meeting. Many members of the YMCA believe that their suppression was caused by Karl Morley's propaganda going too far, so his status in the YMCA has been declining since then, which aroused his own anger, and all this was caused by the wise and powerful king, His Majesty, which made him want to overthrow his rule. However, his wish could not be fulfilled in the YMCA, and other political parties with such aspirations were not so capable, so he could not find a way. If things went on like this, Karl Morley would have no choice but to die and let go of his grievances. Fortunately, the Russian Revolution broke out. When Lenin finally took control of the Russian regime through a series of actions after the outbreak of the Russian Revolution, Karl Morley immediately learned a lot of good things from this revolutionary mentor. He also resigned from Al-Shabaab to establish the Romanian Communist Party. In his view, the Communist Party and the former Al-Shabaab have a high degree of consistency to some extent. Except that one is far left and one is far right. The two sides are very similar in other places. They all advocate putting the people under their own control, controlling every family and even every individual, and they all advocate that for the sake of the country. So Karl Morley learns pretty quickly, because a lot of it is consistent. And through his influence on the people around him, he slowly established the Romanian Communist Party, and he served as the chairman of the party. However, Since it is a political party, it must have funds to maintain its operations, and when the number of the Communist Party was small in the early days, Karol Morley could beg for arms from other places. When the number reaches the hundreds, there must be a steady source of funding. In fact, the current Soviet Russian funds are the easiest for them to obtain. As long as they dare to mention it, the Soviet Russian government must be very happy that its neighbors have established this fraternal party. However, according to Karol Morley, the Romanian Communist Party is too weak, and it is best not to accept funds from the Soviet Union at present. Besides, regarding the current relationship between Romania and Soviet Russia, accepting their funds is self-defeating. So, when the Hungarians found them, the Romanian Communist Party agreed immediately. As for whether it can be done or not, I will talk about it later. At present, my own survival is the most important thing. Chapter 445, The Romanian Communist Party, Part 2. It seems that the negotiation is stuck here because of the amount of money, and Karol Morley does not want to continue the ink with these Hungarians. He stood up and said, "Everyone, we will not change the conditions this time. If we think this condition is unacceptable, then we can only leave." After Karol Morley finished speaking, he stood up, and under his leadership, the Communist Party all stood up. Seeing that the negotiation was going in the direction of destruction, Little Miroka, who was also a Hungarian as the host, quickly stood up and made a round point. "Mr. Antonik, Karol Morley's current name, please wait. It is normal for us to have differences. Can we stay one more day? After all, we have a common ground in overthrowing the current Romanian government. I believe this alone a little is enough to keep the negotiations going. Even if we don't talk, you are still guests, so just taste our food and wine." Little Miroka's words made the Hungarian negotiators react, and they all immediately spoke up to retain them. And Karol Morley saw that the Hungarian Wren's attitude began to soften, and continued, "Well, in the face of Mr. Miroka, we are here for a day. But today I don't think the negotiation needs to go on. We'll talk tomorrow." Seeing that Antonik and others were willing to continue talking, Little Miroka immediately said, "Everyone is welcome to stay at the Miroka Manor, and I'll go prepare a sumptuous lunch." After a while, a sumptuous lunch was placed in front of them at the order of Little Miroka. Food such as honey bread, grilled lamb chops, wine, etc. are constantly being brought to the table. At the dinner table, perhaps these Hungarians realized something and raised their glasses to Karol Morley and others frequently. Everyone chatted and talked together after eating, but they didn't talk about negotiation anyway. It feels like time has passed, and in the evening, the two groups of people will sleep on each floor at this time. Karol Morley took the people who negotiated on behalf of the Communist Party during the day to chat. Ankus, negotiation needs to face many situations, and I'm not very satisfied with your performance during the day. In a separate room, Karol Morley was talking to the young man named Ankus about his daytime performance. Facing Karol Morley's words, Ankus said with a red face, "Teacher, alright." Karol Morley stopped what he was about to say and continued, "This negotiation is not difficult at all. In this negotiation, you have to grasp the key points. They have no choice but us, and we have many choices other than these Hungarians. That's the key. You just have to keep that in mind. Whatever they say about it, it has to be on our terms." Karol Morley's words made Ankus a little ashamed. Seeing the behavior of the young man in front of him, Karol Morley patted him on the shoulder and said, "Go and rest. I believe that after the day's affairs, their attitude will soften, and they will need you next." Ankus replied affirmatively, "Good mentor. I won't let you down tomorrow. Go and rest." After sending Ankus away, Karol Morley sighed. At present, the development of the Communist Party is still too slow, and there are too few outstanding talents. You must know that Ankus is already a good talent in the Communist Party, but as a result, those who do things still need to teach themselves. When I think of the youth clubs in the past, people like Ankus were completely out of my eyes, but now I can only slowly train them. The night was calm, and the next day, the two sides continued their suspended negotiations. But this time, Ankus, as a communist negotiator, showed a different temperament. We are very dissatisfied with the drag of yesterday's negotiation. In fact, we all know who is mainly to deal with in this negotiation. You lack the means, and we will not This is the current reality, so it is you who need our help. Then we may seize power in the future, and then you can also enjoy the results. So this is good for all of us. Why do we have to struggle over a small amount? Ankus said this at the beginning, intending to set the tone for continued negotiations. And this was agreed by Carol Morley. Didn't he see that he was also nodding point, Mr. Ankus? We all know there is no such thing as a free lunch point. The middle-aged man who continued the negotiation did not refute his words at first, and it seemed that he was influenced by yesterday point, and your excellency is right. But given that we have a common enemy, I think help is also due. So after we have studied and decided, the amount you said is not unacceptable. But we need to write a text in order to facilitate the future. Both parties will not forget. And we hope that in the future, the Hungarians can independently decide the ownership of foreigners. After hearing that the Hungarians finally agreed, Ankus glanced at Carol Morley, and after getting a hint, he said, we can accept this condition, but we also have a request. No matter how the situation changes in the future, your request cannot be changed. And it's paid annually, and after both of us sign off, we'll get our first year of sponsorship point. The Hungarian man on the opposite side, who Ankus quoted, discussed it in a low voice before the middle-aged man replied, yes, the efficiency of this negotiation was astonishingly fast. Point as the landowner, Little Miroka took out a bottle of wine and poured it, and said to everyone, let's toast to this joint negotiation. And wish all the best in the future. Point the negotiators, who put their minds at ease, took over the wine one after another, raised their glasses together and said, cheers for our friendship. Point then they drafted 2 documents, which were signed by the heads of both parties, and the negotiation ended perfectly. Point after Carol Morley declined the reservation of the owner, Little Miroka, the group left in a vehicle. Point in the car, Ankus asked worriedly, teacher, are we really going to agree to the Hungarians' request in the future? Will this make the parties' situation more dangerous? Ankus' question made Carol Morley take out the negotiating content he had just signed from the document bag. This document is only useful to the weak. The strong do not need this document to guarantee their own interests, because there is nothing that dares to touch him. Point yes, Carol Morley has been scoffing at this self-signed document. Look at Lenin in Soviet Russia. When will he be bound by these rules? You can abide by it if it is useful to you, as long as you can pay the price. Point Edel was ignorant of the fact that Romania's new communist party was mingling with the Hungarian separatists. Because the German supermarket opened, he was busy shopping and didn't have time to pay attention to these mice hiding in dark corners. Yes, mice. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 446, The Winter in Wilhelmshaven. 1. The winter of 1919 was particularly difficult. The bitterly cold weather and the hungry stomach made people have little hope for the future. So when the new year came in 1920, not many Germans felt any New Year's spirit. Point in this cold winter, a job is a gift from God to many, and Byrne knows it well. He was walking in the vast factory area of the Royal William Dockyard. In the former busy shipyard, no one could be seen for a long time. Only from time to time, he saw allied personnel in military uniforms coming in and out. Byrne turned a blind eye to them and went straight to the area where he worked. Point pushing open the door of a factory next to the dock, he walked in directly. It is full of shipbuilding equipment such as brackets, hawser, brakes, winches, sprockets, gearboxes, and various water pumps. These are essential pieces of equipment for the construction of a seagoing vessel, and his Byrne is one of those responsible for looking after and maintaining them. Point when he walked in, several colleagues were already here. Point Bernie, you came a lot late today. Point a colleague greeted him. Point Bernie explained to his colleagues in a potato-like tone, no way, I just got paid yesterday, and I need to buy some potatoes and firewood. The day before yesterday at home was broken. Point hearing Byrne's explanation, the colleagues didn't say anything, and everyone knew that the Byrne family was the situation. There are 3 children in the family, and the wife is also frail and sick. The family counts on him to work to support the family. No one can accuse a husband of such a heavy burden. Point after a few chats, A few people immediately started to check the situation of these equipment, and at this moment a colleague whispered mysteriously, "We can't do this job for long. What? Crackling. All colleagues stared at the speaker, while Bernie's ruler and other items were scattered all over the floor at this time. A leading colleague said, "Charlotte, do you know what you are talking about?" After one person spoke, others also spoke. "Charlotte, this kind of thing is not a joke. Unemployment is a disaster for them now. If you look at the people who are doing nothing in Wilhelmshaven right now, you will know that these people are hungry and dirty. Many people can't see the sun the next day. Every day, the bodies of many of these people are transported outside the city for burial. None of them want to live this kind of life, even though the job is only enough for themselves now. But they are much better than those people. At least they have a house to live in and food to eat." Seeing that everyone was blaming him, this colleague named Cheryl was also anxious. He said directly, "Do you think I don't want this? I wanted to." At this time, Bern stopped what other colleagues wanted to say. He stepped forward and patted Charlotte on the shoulder and said, "I believe you won't take this kind of thing. So where did you hear the news?" Bernie's words attracted everyone's attention, and they all wanted to hear what Charlotte had to say. "Because I forgot what I didn't take in the factory yesterday. When I returned to the factory, I overheard two officers from the allied countries talking. They said that, because our shipyard is a royal property, we should be the main person responsible for starting the war. The assets of Kaiser Wilhelm compensated to the allied side." The content of Charlotte's words immediately attracted rebuttals from other colleagues. "Even if they are compensated, the shipyard can't move. They always need people to work in the shipyard. Is it possible to fire those of us who are familiar with the shipyard and find newbies again?" Nope. Faced with a rebuttal, Charlotte immediately continued, "I thought so too at the time, but later I heard them say that they want to see if anyone can take over the shipyard equipment, and if no one takes over, they will all be demolished and sent back to China. Are you going to continue working on the shipyard?" What Charlotte said made everyone present silent. They were all familiar with shipbuilding. How could a ship be built without equipment? A colleague talked about the numerous shipyard equipment. "I remember the 320-ton gantry cranes and large hydraulic presses installed in the shipyard for less than a year. It is very difficult to relocate these equipment. When I installed the hydraulic press, it took me a week to install it. But what's the use of it? These allied people are just trying to tear down our factory." A colleague spoke his own words angrily. Another colleague said what everyone cared about most. "If the shipyard is moved, what will we do?" "Yes, don't mention anything else now. The most important thing is to ensure that you can live. Should we organize a demonstration by shipyard employees and ask them not to move the shipyard?" A colleague says what he thinks will work. That won't work. "Do you think these allied people will take care of us? And they have a regiment of French troops outside the city. How many of us are now?" Another colleague countered his remarks. "Demonstrations are not allowed. Not to mention that there are only a few hundred people in the shipyard now. Even when there were tens of thousands of people in the past, the people of these allied countries will not be relentless in suppressing them. There were millions of casualties on both sides in the war, and there were French troops outside the city. Don't forget that the French are currently feuding with them. I believe they will not miss this opportunity. Otherwise we will go to the city government and let the state buy the shipyard, so we can continue to work. One idea didn't work, and a colleague made another suggestion. Now where does the government get the money to buy the shipyard, which has invested tens of millions of marks? The mark they are talking about is not the mark that looks like waste paper now, but the gold mark before the outbreak of the war, which can actually be exchanged for gold from the bank. Now the city government can't even manage the people who have lost their jobs. Where will they put the money to buy the shipyard? And they don't have the money. The colleague couldn't help but say, "It's not going to work either. Are we just waiting? Otherwise, what can we do? I hope that someone will buy the shipyard from the allies, and someone will be willing." Seeing that they were all headless flies, the colleague suddenly asked about Bernie, what do you think we should do? Bernie, with a heavy face, thought about it, and said slowly, "I don't know, but there will always be a way. There will always be a way." After Bernie finished speaking, he picked up the tool and walked towards the equipment. Today's work is not done, so it must continue to be done. Point. After seeing Bern leave, Charlotte gave him a sympathetic look and said, "Among us, Bernie is the most stressed, don't embarrass him." Chapter 447, The Winter in Wilhelmshaven, Part 2. Near the North Sea Pier in Wilhelmshaven, there is a neighborhood called Sherrick. There are mainly middle and low-level people living here. They rely on part-time labor, helping people do laundry and other jobs to support their livelihoods. Bern's home is here. I'm back. Dragging exhausted body and mind, Bern returned to this poor and warm home. I'm home. The voice of his wife Filna came from the kitchen. Smelling the aroma of bacon in the potatoes, Bern walked into the kitchen in surprise and found that his wife was making bacon, mashed potatoes, and dried mushroom soup. Why do you eat so well today? Hearing her husband's question, her wife, Filna, said while busy, "It's mainly because you are working hard, and Kika has a good score in the exam. How about coming to taste it?" Zico is their second son, and his academic performance is very good. The teacher said that he has the hope of being admitted to the famous Heidelberg University. Seeing the food his wife handed to him with a spoon, the bacon grains were clearly visible in the mashed potatoes. Bern ate it in one bite. What about the taste? Looking at his expecting wife, Bernie gave his rough hand a thumbs up. After being praised by her husband, Ferna giggled, and even the wrinkles on her face due to the hard work smoothed out a lot. Mom, isn't dinner ready yet? I'm starving. 8-year-old daughter Evelyn appeared at the kitchen door complaining. Bernie touched Evelyn's head and said with a smile, "Oh, our little angel is hungry." I've been hungry for a long time. I smelled the aroma when I was playing outside with Rona. The Rona, Evelyn said, was the child of Dort, the next door neighbor, and the two like to play together. It's time to eat. Wife Filna added. After getting the answer that my mother wants to have dinner, Evelyn jumped out of the kitchen. When Filna brought the food to the simple dining table made of a wooden board, the three children had already sat down with spoons in the small living room. Looking at today's sumptuous dinner, they swallowed involuntarily. Let's eat. With the sound of Bern's meal, the three children who couldn't bear the aroma of the food for a long time immediately devoured it. Especially the eldest son, Lodel, who was 14 years old when half the eldest son ate. The poor old man, a portion on the plate that is comparable to that of Bern, and the rapid reduction is visible to the naked eye. Eat slowly. Seeing that Lodel's mouth was full of food, his wife couldn't help persuading him. Lodel, who was speechless after eating, could only make this sound, which was a response to his mother. The delicious dinner left everyone speechless, and they all bowed their heads and ate their own food until Loder put his spoon toward Ferna's plate. Brother, you are so annoying. I see that you can't finish eating. I'm helping you. Lodel, who was caught by his sister, forced his defense. I can't eat it. You can take it. Seeing the eldest son, who was still a little hungry, his wife put the rest of her food on Lodel's plate. And Bernie, who was watching all this, thought of the news he just got today, and a trace of sadness could not be dissipated. The shipyard is really going to be closed. What should I do with my family's life? Ferna, who had lived together for many years, noticed the sad look on Bern's face and immediately asked with concern, "What's the matter with you? Is there something unhappy at work?" "No, I'm just wondering if I need to find another part-time job. At present, I only rely on the shipyard job to make my family too poor." Bernie's cover-up diverted his wife's attention. It's so hard to find part-time jobs now. I went to a career counseling agency, and there's always a long queue there. I heard that some people are waiting there all night long, so I'm afraid it's not easy. His wife's words made Bern's face darken again. The ship-related industry in Wilhelmshaven is developed, and most of the people in the city are doing this kind of work. Now almost all shipyards are facing inspections by the allied countries. Many workers have been fired, and there are unemployed people everywhere. Where can I find such a suitable part-time job for myself? Listen to Rona. Their family is about to move out. At this time, the words of daughter Evelyn interjected, which caught the attention of the two. The Dorts are moving out. Of course, Bern knows about Dort, its neighbor. Their family is somewhat similar to Bern, working in a small shipyard with several children. The only difference is that Dort was fired some time ago, and he borrowed food from himself some time ago. Yes, I heard from Rona. The family is moving to Romania. His father was recruited by a shipyard in Romania, and Rona and the others need to follow their parents to Romania. As Evelyn spoke, she fell into the loss that her friend was about to leave, and her words made Bern feel that there is no way out. Perhaps this is also a way out, but of course it is also the last option. After all, because of the war between the two countries before, the German public opinion made Romania a bit unbearable. And as a German, less than a last resort who wants to go to a country that is somewhat hostile to the Germans, yes, Romania is currently an accomplice of Britain and France in German public opinion. Although Edel has made many goodwill actions, for example, Romania's loan to Germany has been repaid in advance with food and other materials, and he has also donated a lot in Edel's name. The reparations for Romania in the Treaty of Versailles were also offset by a large hoard of military materials such as weapons and ammunition. These are basically the benefits of the German government, and ordinary people think too much about how much they want to gain from it. After all, before the war, Romania's strength was not high, and in the eyes of the German people, it was a backcountry. After the war, Romania was also an accomplice to help the Allies win, and what kind of reputation can it have? The only thing that people remember is Romania's food, oil, and cars, and the royal family is also a member of the Hohenzollern family. However, these acts of goodwill have a certain effect. At least Romania is currently the one with a better reputation among the Entente countries. In the case of the same salary, most people will choose the latter if they go to work in the UK, France, the US, or Romania. The second is the United States, Britain, and France in order, but unfortunately, apart from the United States and Romania, Britain and France rarely recruit people in Germany. At present, the United States is more about acquiring technology and top talents. Unless ordinary workers actively immigrate, there is not much possibility of connecting with the United States. And the recruitment of skilled workers is only done by Romania. After all, the newly occupied territory is too large and needs a lot of material comfort, all of which require factory production. Under the conscious guidance of the Romanian government, many factories now form groups to recruit people they need. In terms of recruiting personnel, Romania currently sends many officials to help these companies in Germany, mainly by the chief of the bodyguard, Karist. Chapter 448, The Competition for Talents. We have recruited more than 2,100 people in Hamburg, and in the Ruhr area, this number has reached more than 11,000. Mainly in heavy industries such as steel industry, machinery manufacturing, chemical industry, coal mining, etc. We also recruited more than 3,000 in light industry. There are mainly food, textile, papermaking, printing, etc. In the field of education and scientific research, we have recruited 64 professors, senior engineers and other titles and above, 214 associate professors and other titles, and 457 lecturers and engineers. In a building in Hamburg, a Romanian staff member is reporting the current recruitment results to Karist and the office. Because of the convenient transportation in Hamburg, Romania places the headquarters of German talent introduction here, and Karist is responsible for guiding the recruitment of various regions. After listening to the subordinates' report, Karist put down the pen in his hand and instructed, "The introduction of education and scientific research talents is not enough, and more efforts are needed, especially for senior talents such as professors of senior engineers. I will send a telegram later to inform them of your requirements. However, we are restricted by Britain, France, the United States, Italy and other countries in recruiting these high-level talents, and they are also attracting these talents. Especially the United States people. We can't compete with their conditions." The subordinates' report made Karist frown. Then start from other aspects. Start with the placement and living of their family members. After all, our funds are not as rich as the Yankees, and we can't give so many resettlement fees and research funds. Okay. After his subordinates left, Karist rubbed his swollen temples. Of course he knew about the wealth of Americans. At the professor level, the settling fee alone reaches $1,000 to $1,200, while Romania can only give $500 to $600, and the gap in research funding is also not small. And in terms of some well-known talents, the gap between the United States and Romania is even greater. This is not to say that Romania cannot come up with so many expenses, but to comprehensively consider the domestic level. If Romania is also given the level of the United States, then the hard-working scientific research and education personnel in China will not rise. The annual financial expenditure has already been arranged at the beginning of the year. Once you increase the funding for education and research, what will happen to the funding of other government departments? Moreover, recruiting education and scientific research talents in Germany is a long-term task, not a matter of 1 or 2 years, but a matter of more than 10 years. Edel explained to him in detail before departure. If it is higher now, it will not be lower in the future. Karest has never heard of the saying that Shengmin fights Makiu, but he also knows the truth. Click, click, click. At this time, a knock on the door interrupted Karest's thinking. Come in. As Karest's voice fell, a subordinate pushed in the door. Poke, how are things going? Karest called the name of the subordinate and asked. Poke was the person in charge of following up the famous German scientist. The main reason is to recruit these famous people in the scientific community to Romania, to improve the level of domestic science. However, the competition he faces is also very fierce. Countries such as Britain, France and the United States are also fighting these people's ideas, and Germany is retaining them. It is not easy to attract these scientific giants to Romania, but as long as one succeeds, it is profitable for Romania. This is just like the superstars of later football clubs. If you can introduce them, you will earn money. Not too much in terms of its scientific field or Romania's reputation. There is not much progress at present. Many people are politely rejecting it, and only a few are considering it. However, we have too many competitors and the conditions are not very good, which is very troublesome. Poke's words also poured out the current embarrassment of Romania in the field of science. That is, Romania has too few research results in the field of scientific research, and Romanian scientists are not well known. Although Romania has increased its investment in research funding in the past 2 years, scientific research requires long-term investment to produce results. When Romania has not yet achieved results, it is still in the stage of expanding laboratory equipment to prepare for research. This is also the reason why Romania has no other famous scientists in recent years except Rudolf Diesel, who was recruited by Edel himself, who was in distress at that time. And strictly speaking, Rudolf Diesel was an inventor, not a scientist. Continue to follow up. These people are too important to Romania. We can't slack off. As long as there is a chance, we need to use 200% of our efforts to win. By the way, what's the matter? After Karest finished his request, he remembered to ask Poke why he came to him. We ran out of funds this month, and we need you to approve $20,000 in funding. Karest asked, while writing a note for receiving funds. Why does this month spend so fast? Mainly this month, I ran a lot of houses in a row. When I visited Maximum Planck's house, I found that their family had a difficult life, so I decided to help them. Poke says it is true. Maximum Planck is currently in a phase of grief. His eldest son Karel died at the Battle of Verdun, and his second son Owen was captured by the French in 1914 and released after the armistice. The eldest daughter, Grete, died 2 years ago while giving birth to her first child, and the second daughter also died in childbirth this year. At present, only the second son and the younger son are left. It is worth mentioning that both of his daughters are married to the same person, which is simply the most tragic scene for a white-haired person to send a black-haired person. Go on. Don't let our work fall behind the Vienna side. Karest handed Poke the written note. Poke took the note and said, don't worry, I won't let Vienna run ahead of me. But I heard that they have found many young talents there. Yes, Romania is not only recruiting high-level talents in Germany. In the core territory of the former Austria-Hungary, Vienna has also arranged a group of people to do the same thing. After all, the disintegrated Austro-Hungarian Empire still has a lot of talents, but the funding is much less than them. Facing Poke's inquiry, Karest replied, yes, the main reason for Vienna is that many famous scientists are highly competitive, so they have found a lot of capable young people. I know what you think, but we know more than Vienna. Young people are looking for it, and those famous scientists are looking for it. You must know that our expenses are not much higher than this. If we only make the same achievements as them, then how can we show our ability before your majesty? Poke pocketed the note and continued, okay, I understand. There are just a few young scientists who just became famous, and I'll try my luck. Go point for his own opinionated and capable subordinate. Karest is also quite delegating. Unbeknownst to the two, Vienna had recruited a young man who would later become famous for his cat. Whether the young man will be able to publish the theory that made him famous in the future remains to be seen. But I believe this is not difficult. After all, the ability is there. Chapter 449. The wind rises in Warsaw. As the Romanians scavenge for talent in Germany and Austria, talks are underway in Warsaw on Poland's foreign situation. After the establishment of the Second Republic of Poland, its diplomatic relations with neighboring countries were relatively poor. Mainly because Poland had territorial disputes with the nascent Lithuania, Belarus, the Czech Republic, the defeated Germany, and the Romanian-occupied Galicia. Among them, the territorial dispute with Germany was supported by Britain and France in the Treaty of Versailles, and Poland took the opportunity to gain West Prussia, Posen and parts of Silesia. And the territorial dispute with the Czech Republic was also resolved in the Bolshevik War at the beginning of the year. The Big Fist has the final say. This is different from the original history. This time Poland won the Polish War. The disputed territory of Szczecin Silesia is currently firmly in the hands of the Warsaw government. Szczecin Silesia is located in a territory where Poland, the Czech Republic and Slovakia intersect, with an area of 2,004 square kilometers and a population of 435,000 people. The main ethnic groups are Polish 48.2%, Czech 21.7% and Slovak 23.8%. Moreover, the region is rich in coal resources, and more importantly, the region has a railway connecting the Czech Republic and Slovakia, which is very important to the Czech Republic. Therefore, both sides insist on not letting go of this disputed territory. It's just that Poland seems to have an advantage at the moment. As for whether there is still a need to do it in the future, it is unknown. In addition, Poland has made no secret of its desire to merge with Lithuania to form the United Republic of Lithuania and Poland. Only in February 1919 Lithuania and Belarus jointly formed the Lithuanian-Belarusian Soviet Socialist Republic. This made the Polish army quite dissatisfied and invaded Lithuania in April, and in August the Lithuanian bourgeoisie came to power and declared independence. Poland can't wait to merge with it to become a federal state. After all, the Polish-Lithuanian United Kingdom is the most glorious time of Poland. It's just that this goal has been stuck in the air because of the delay in negotiating the merger in Poland. As for the Belarusian Soviet government, Poland has a different mind. In the eyes of Piłsudski, the actual ruler of Poland, the main problem for Poland at present is to restore the territory of the past. After the Russo-Soviet War, he threw the idea of an intermarine federation, Baltic to Black Sea, in the trash. And in this war, not only saw the strength of the Romanian army, but also saw the powerful assistance from Britain and France. And Poland can learn too much from this war, such as the disputed Belarusian territorial issue, and how to face the conflict with Soviet Russia. He can learn how to deal with it. In fact, after Poland became independent, it had a deeper involvement in the Russian Civil War. But what is interesting is that the Poles fought not only with the Soviet Red Army, but also with the White Guards, because as the founder of the Polish army, Piłsudski had always believed that the Russians would be the main threat to Poland in the future, and that both White Russia and Red Russia would be hostile to the new Poland. To ensure Poland's security, they must now take advantage of their civil war to vigorously weaken future Russia. So the Polish army, under the command of Piłsudski, got involved in the Russian Civil War at this time. The White Army, which had the upper hand in the Civil War, was advancing towards Moscow. In the face of the aggressive Polish army, Soviet Russia was devastated by the internal and external wars. To this end, Lenin once again resorted to a trick to deal with the Germans, strategic compromise, and proposed to assign the Minsk and Khmelnytsky areas to Poland. Of course the Poles liked it, and they thought the offer was better than they expected. In December, the two sides sat at the negotiating table, and a marathon negotiation began. 4 months later, the Poles suddenly realized that Soviet Russia was exchanging negotiation for time to restore strength and prepare for war in the Belvedere Palace. the official residence of the Polish head of state. Talks are underway about the use of force to seize territory. Our territorial dispute with Belarus. I think it's time for a complete solution. We should restore the territory of Poland before 1772, and the negotiations with the Soviet Union cannot continue. Lenin is a liar, and he negotiated with us. It's just a tactic to delay the army. We can't wait for them to relax before intervening in the territorial dispute with us. We must immediately march into Belarus and take back the territory that belongs to us. As Piłsudski's comrade in arms, Prime Minister Morawiecki was the first to speak out about his plans. The leaders of the other Polish political factions in this negotiation all whispered to each other in the face of Morawiecki's words. I have a question. At this time, a voice came out, and everyone saw that it was Morawiecki, the leader of the National Democratic Party. He is also the author of the book Ideas of a Modern Pole that influenced Poles' later thinking. In this book, Morawiecki sees all ethnic minorities as debilitating ingots and thinks they should be cleaned up. For example, on the views of minority Jews, Morawiecki described his views in detail in the book. In the peculiarities of this racial Jew, quite a number of values that are fundamentally different from our morals and detrimental to our lives are increasingly manifested. If we were assimilated by a considerable number of Jews, we would be destroyed, and the Jews would take advantage of the depraved. The foundation replaces us, not the young creative foundation we need to create the future. It was because of him that the merger with Lithuania was delayed. This is a rather narrow nationalist, arguing that all minorities must be like the Poles, both in terms of living habits and cognition. Contrary to him, Piłsudski was a multi-ethnic federal statist. As long as they agreed with Poland as a country or a federation, all ethnic groups could live in peace. Therefore, the two people's views are completely left, which also caused Morawiecki to be Piłsudski's mortal enemy. And in January 1919, some of Morawiecki's supporters tried unsuccessfully to stage a coup against Piłsudski and Prime Minister Morawiecki. Seeing that Morawiecki wanted to express his opinion, Prime Minister Morawiecki could only let him speak. Please state your opinion, Mr. Morawiecki. Immediately after receiving permission, Morawiecki said, as for the recovery of our territory, of course I support it. But we must pay attention to the actions of the Germans in our territory, knowing that in West Prussia, Posen and Silesia there are too many Germans, and we must take precautions against them. In addition, we can continue to talk with the Soviet Union, as long as we set a time limit. Yes, Morawiecki is not only the opposite of Piłsudski on national issues, but also on who is a threat to Poland. In his view, Germany is the main threat to Poland. Even because of this he was disappointed with the Treaty of Versailles, believing that it was an international Jewish conspiracy. British Prime Minister David Lloyd George was bribed by a German Jewish financial syndicate to make the Polish-German border, in Morawiecki's eyes, so unfavorable for Poland. In his opinion, the German-Polish border should be pushed further west. This is also the foreshadowing of Poland being divided up again in the future. After all, after Piłsudski's death, there is really no one to save Poland from Russia and Germany. And Morawiecki actually seized part of the original Polish territory of Belarus and Soviet Russia. In fact, he is very much in favor of it. Of course, it would be best if he could get it back through negotiation. Morawiecki's words also caused other people to discuss in a low voice, and it can be seen that many people are very interested in this. At this time Prime Minister Morawiecki must speak to interrupt their fantasy. Lenin is not credible. Look at the Brest Treaty he signed with Germany. They abolished the treaty as soon as Germany lost the war, and we don't have the strength of Germany. When Russia ends the civil war, the next round will be our turn. And the Soviet Russian government is no different from the previous Russian government. They believe in force more, and only by taking back our territory when they are weak can they ensure the safety of Poland. Having said that, Morawiecki took the opportunity to take Romania as an example. Look at the attitude of Soviet Russia after the war with Romania. Before you compare it, you can find that the Russians don't remember to eat. Even the Treaty of Brest was signed after the Germans beat them. 2 examples were given in a row, and the people of various political parties present also gave up their thoughts of taking back the territory in the peace talks. In the end, this negotiation resulted in the agreement to enter Belarus. Of course, the Poles were not alone in the fight. After deciding to move on to Belarus, they immediately sought the aid of the British and French ambassadors. The British and French ambassadors were quite supportive of the conflict between the Soviet Union and Poland, which would be triggered by Poland's recovery of territory. Point among them, Maxim Weygand, the French military envoy in Poland, was the most active. So with the support of Britain and France, the Poles finally took a solid step towards a great dream. As for whether this step will be stable or not, it is unknown. Chapter 450 Marshal. When Poland showed its ancestral glory, Romania, which had just ended the war with Soviet Russia, was holding an entitlement ceremony. That's right, the long-delayed Romanian marshal consecration ceremony is taking place in the royal palace. The Mihai Hall, located on the east side of the palace, is named after the monarch Mihai Viteaza, who united the three small states of Wallachia, Transylvania, and Moldavia for the first time in history. This is where he is considered to be one of Romania's greatest national heroes. Generally, the Mihai Hall will only be opened when a grand ceremony is required. The promotion of the Romanian marshal is not a solemn event, and of course it must be done in this hall. At 10 o'clock in the morning, under the sound of music and the attention of many officials and generals. General Courtois, with grey hair and an old-fashioned appearance, walked in front of Edel in a new military uniform with no rank. This military uniform is a part of the improvement that Edel made with reference to the Third Reich Marshal's uniform. This is not because Edel likes the party that has not yet been established, but for aesthetics. I have to admit that the head of state, the painter born, really has a high artistic level. As the presenter, Edel talked about the life and achievements of General Courtois. Courtois, born in 1848 in the town of Dalim, in the county of Foxany, joined the Romanian army in 1876, served well in the War of Independence, and was therefore promoted to the post of company commander. And in the following, Edel calmly stated the life of His Excellency the Minister of the Army. As a soldier who enlisted as a civilian, the rank of marshal is simply unimaginable. For the old man who had experienced all the wars since the founding of Romania, the generals present could only express their respect. This is not only a tribute to Courtois, who is about to become Romania's first marshal, but also a respect for Romanian soldiers in previous wars. Of course, Courtois's flexible response to politics is also the reason why these generals admire. Assist two kings and both can be trusted. They can't accept it. It is impossible for a soldier who does not understand politics at all to become a general. This is also the public opinion of a civilized country. At the end of his long life and achievements, when Edel said at the end, therefore, he was promoted to General Courtois as marshal, and there was fog in Courtois's eyes. At this moment, he reached the peak of his life. Edel took out the marshal's epaulette and put it on the old man himself. This is a golden white rosette epaulette with two crossbars. The crossbar represents loyalty and courage. The white rose is the national flower of Romania, representing perseverance and holiness. They all perfectly display the qualities a Romanian soldier needs, which is why Edel uses them as epaulettes. After putting on the epaulettes for Marshal Courtois, Edel took out the cane representing the marshal's status from the tray. The marshal's rod is derived from the ancient Roman scepter. More than 2000 years ago in ancient Rome, this short and thick cylinder was the messenger festival of Roman generals. At that time, a section of wood, also a sheepskin tube was used, was hollowed out in the middle. The order written on it was sealed and passed on by the messengers in the army. The commanded generals sometimes stand on the top of the city, and the messengers can throw the messenger festival on it, which is no less effective than the supreme Roman law. Crassus suppressed Spartacus' heraldry with unique design and exquisite workmanship, with metal animal skins and gemstone inlays. Every Roman general in the past tried to make his heraldry different, so that it could be distinguished and shown off. In modern times, Napoleon III promoted François Achille Bazin as a marshal, 1811 to 1888, in 1864, and also gave him a marshal staff. And Edel is not interested in the current general marshal's sash in various countries, as long as he thinks it is not handsome enough to show the heroic appearance of Romanian soldiers, mainly because the sash is really picky, and the figure is not tall enough to be promoted so ugly. And the messenger representing the power of the ancient Roman Empire was deeply loved by him. The Romanian marshal's cane is 48 centimeters long, and has a cross-sectional diameter of 3.5 centimeters. The pattern of Gabriel killing the devil and the Romanian national emblem are printed on both sides of the stigma. The name of the winner Courtois is engraved under the stigma. The rod is purple and has 24 golden eagles with wings. The main material of the marshal's rod is made of precious metals, gold, silver, and gemstones. When Edel handed the marshal's staff to Courtois, everyone in the room applauded. Courtois, who became Romania's first marshal, felt that he was completely satisfied at this moment, and he would be very happy, even if he retired tomorrow. For this reason, after he took the marshal's stick, he waved his marshal's stick to the audience, which made the applause louder. Officials can only envy this. After all, this is the highest honor of the military. But the officers present looked different, especially those who thought they had a chance. Lieutenant General Farid, Lieutenant General Mandif, Lieutenant General Ankada, Major General Huffman, and others were definitely a great encouragement. Yes, Major General Huffman thinks his younger self has a good chance. Napoleon said that a soldier who does not want to be a marshal is not a good soldier. So who does not feel envious of the Marshal Courtois who holds the marshal's staff? Others can only show expressions of envy and jealousy. But for General Ploiesti, the chief of the general staff, he has some bitter feelings. It is also promoted to marshal. He will be a day later. The first one is of course the most important. However, whoever has not participated in the War of Independence is always inferior to Courtois, who has participated in all the wars after Romania's independence. In terms of qualifications, however, for this little regret, Admiral Ploiesti, who is about to become a marshal, has no dissatisfaction. It's good to be a marshal, but I'm afraid that good things can be accounted for by myself, not to cause other people's dissatisfaction. After the entitlement ceremony was completed, everyone present came forward to congratulate Courtois, and the newly promoted His Excellency Marshal had a happy expression on his face, and responded to every blessing. Of course, the generals will not forget the soon to be promoted Chief of Staff, and they also stepped forward to congratulate him in advance. There was a festive atmosphere in the hall for a while. At this moment, a guard walked up to His Excellency the Marshal and said softly, "Marshal Courtois, Your Majesty invites you to lunch as an expression of joy." Okay, please tell Your Majesty. I'm very happy to receive this honor. After Marshal Courtois answered, the guards quietly left. As for the generals present, who would have heard the conversation between the two, no one would be envious of His Majesty the King's respect for the Marshal. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.